Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the D and WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the second part of What If Deku Suddenly Got a Bone-Breaking Quirk. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Retirement homes. God, how Aizawa hated retirement homes. He hoped and prayed when he got too old his boys wouldn't just dump him into one of these hellholes. Retirement homes already reeked of disinfectant, but the disinfectant was a ruse to hide the underlying smell of old feces and urine. Whenever you're ready, Hitoshi, Aizawa told his son as they stood in front of Ishii's bedroom door. We're both going to be right here if you need us. Originally, Higashi was going to meet up with them today, but circumstances surrounding his job forced him to cancel. Which was fine, they didn't need him. They were going to stay so Hitoshi could say goodbye to Ishii for one final time. Hitoshi wiped his sweaty palms on his school pants. They didn't have time to change after school, before he pulled his hair back into a ponytail and used the hair tie on his wrist to tie it back. Okay, I'm ready, he said when the hair tie snapped into place. He reached over for the door to Ishii's room and walked inside. Is it time for my snack already? Came the soft and wary voice of Ishii Shinsu. Hitoshi paused just a few feet from her. His body no longer responded as he stared at his biological grandmother. She was bedridden, something he figured out but just didn't expect to see. She was hooked up to so many tubes and machines that it was hard to keep track of it all. Ishii hardly had the strength to lift her head, so she can only lamely turn it to look at Hitoshi. Her eyes were milky white in color, but had some vision in them as the moment she saw him her eyes just lit up. Die. Hitoshi cringed almost immediately. His mouth felt sealed shut as he just stared at the woman laying before him. His fingers twitched at his sides and he just looked at her, unable to bring himself to say anything. Where have you been? I've been so worried about you. Ishii brought her hand out with the palm facing up. She wanted his hand to hold. Hitoshi felt his body freeze as he raised his hand up, but didn't extend it out to his grandmother. You're late for dinner, Ishii commented with a small smile on her face. For just a brief moment Hitoshi saw this scene from outside his body, but the experience didn't last for long. He sucked in a slow and deep breath before he finally forced his hand over to Ishii. His hand trembled as he lightly placed it in her palm. Her skin was soft, wrinkled, and cold to the touch. She smiled at him as Hitoshi took his seat across from her. You need to get a haircut. It's so frizzy and long. Too long, Ishii commented as she looked at him. With her long spindly fingers she reached over towards Hitoshi and lightly ran 2 fingers through a lock of his hair that was hanging out of his ponytail holder. I like it long. Hitoshi's voice sounded foreign in his ears as he whispered this to Ishii. His voice shook slightly and he sucked in a deep breath. Ishii snorted at him. She's such a rebel, die. Hitoshi couldn't help it. The air just became so heavy that he had to break the silence. He laughed out a shaky and scared little laugh. Was I? He choked out. I hate this. I hate this so much. Oh yes, you always disobeyed me. Always stayed out after dark, despite me telling you to be back home at a certain time. Yes, you're such a little troublemaker, but that's okay. I love you all the same, my little Dai. Huh. Suddenly, Ishii became aware of Aizawa and Izuku standing behind Hitoshi. When she did, Hitoshi saw recognition light behind her muted eyes. I remember you, she said suddenly while pointing past Hitoshi. A small little smile gracing her lips. She moved her hand up and down a couple of times as she grinned a little wider. Hitoshi followed her finger and realized she was pointing at Bae. Izuku pointed at himself while he looked from Aizawa to Hitoshi in surprise. Oh no, you're mistaken. Izuku quickly waved his hands in front of his person as he gave an awkward smile at Ishii. No, you never made my bed right, nor my coffee. It was always way too sweet when you made it. Ishii Hitoshi quickly spoke to bring his grandmother back to the present. Grandma, Mom, let's change the subject. He didn't know who to be right now. Hitoshi Aizawa. Hitoshi Shinsu. Or Dai Shinsu. It's all too complicated. I mean, she's nice enough, but it's not hard to make a coffee. Please, let's talk about something else. Hitoshi quickly interrupted her. That's nobody. In fact, they were leaving. Hitoshi looked over his shoulder at Izuku and his father. There was a moment of confusion before the two of them both just backed out of the room at his request. Hitoshi let out a relaxed breath once the door shut behind them. Why they even came in behind him was beyond him. Hitoshi focused back around at Ishii and quietly placed his other hand on top of Ishii's. Maybe he could just rip the band-aid off and leave before he's forced to stay even longer. I can't stay for long. I just wanted to come back to tell you goodbye. Oh, Tsukato, we have all the time in the world. All the time in the world, Ishii whispered as she looked up at the ceiling now, her eyes far away in another time. Tsukato Shinsu, my grandfather. Hitoshi only ever heard that name once before, but was never given the privilege of meeting him as Tsukato passed away shortly after Hitoshi was born. He didn't even remember what Tsukato looked like. even if he tried to concentrate on the man's image in his mind. It just came up blank. Ishii smiled as she focused back around to Hitoshi now. You're just as handsome as the day I met you. She reached over and touched Hitoshi's cheek. Hitoshi reached up and touched the back of her hand. I'm going to have to go, he whispered in a soft voice. It was nice seeing you again. Hitoshi slowly started to stand up, but Ishii frowned at him and it made Hitoshi stop, especially when Ishii grasped his hand and held it with enough grip to make him pause. Wait, don't leave me again. I don't think my heart can take it. Hitoshi didn't know what happened or what came over him, but he felt tears suddenly perk into the corners of his eyes. He felt both sad and angry all at once. A part of him, a deep and angry part of Hitoshi hidden away in the very corner of his soul, wanted to yell at her. He wanted to say, "You had him for over 35 years. I hardly remember him. Dai was murdered in front of me and it wasn't fair." Hitoshi was angry, yes, but there was another little voice in his head that was talking now. She's in the same boat as you, don't you dare forget that. You lost your father, yes, but she not only lost her son but doesn't even remember losing him. Can you imagine being told day after day that your son is dead, only to forget it? It was Hitoshi's conscience talking, and every day it sounded more and more like Aizawa. So, Hitoshi sat back down with a soft sigh. I won't be gone for long. He finally managed to choke out before wiping his tears away again. In fact, I'm sure we'll be meeting together again fairly soon. Sooner than you might think, actually. Well, that makes me happy, Dai. You've always been such a good son to your mama, though you rarely visit me these days. She patted the back of his hand lovingly. I need to go. Hitoshi finally pushed himself fully out of the chair. If he stayed any longer, he knew he was going to have a panic attack or a crying fit. Just know that I love you and goodbye, for now. Hitoshi turned his back to her and he bit his wobbling lip to keep it still. Oh, Ishii let out a sad noise. Well, if you're leaving, can you bring that woman back? She knows how to make my coffee the way I like. Aizawa and Izuku stayed outside of the door. Aizawa shoved his hands into his pants pockets and Izuku tilted his head to the side. That was weird, Izuku finally said after a few seconds. Yes, but she's elderly and possibly dealing with Alzheimer's. Aizawa sighed with a soft shrug. Confusion is, unfortunately, common. He then looked at his son out of the corner of his eye. Aizawa would be lying if he said it didn't bug him. She looked directly at Izuku and said, I remember you. It left a bad taste in Aizawa's mouth. As far as he was told, Izuku and Ishii never spoke to each other aside from today. Not only that, but Ishii called Izuku a she, meaning she didn't see Izuku. Ishii saw a woman that must have looked an awful lot like Izuku. Hey, I saw a vending machine at the help desk. I'm going to get a canned coffee. Do you want a soda? Aizawa inquired as he looked at Izuku. Izuku let out a soft hum. Sure, a Pepsi, if they have one. Okay. Aizawa shoved both hands into his pockets. Hitoshi likes cherry cola, right? Yep, I'll be back, he grumbled as he started walking away. Of course, he wasn't just going to get a couple of drinks. He had his own motives and he wanted to know if he was right. You're being stupid, Shouta. The little voice in his head whispered. I know it's probably just a woman with green hair that made Ishii think of Izuku, but still. What if this woman could be the missing piece? Izuku was an enigma as well as his biological family. Nobody ever claimed him up as their own, but running his DNA through the system turned up nothing. But he wasn't from out of the country, meaning his family was somewhere in Japan. Yet, nobody came for him. Not a single soul. So, what family doesn't want their kid or nephew back? Aizawa approached the front desk. There was a frizzy yellow-haired bookkeeper with the face of a green lizard and scales to match, sitting at the desk. She seemed to be chewing gum loudly, with her mouth open. Aizawa was already feeling his irritation rise. He quietly put his hand on the desk and leaned down a bit. I just have a question. If it's abuse concerns, I can give you a phone number. No, Aizawa put his hand up, stopping her right there. I just need to ask. Is there a woman with green hair that works here? The lady looked at Aizawa and slowed down her gum chewing, but didn't stop it. She then sized him up and down with her eyes. No, she stretched her voice as she continued to look him up and down. Aizawa huffed in irritation and reached into his pocket. He then pulled out his license. I'm a pro hero. I don't want a lot. I just want an honest answer to my question. She should have olive green hair and maybe green eyes and freckles to match. Looking for the baby mama to that boy of yours. The bookkeeper leaned back into her chair with the biggest grin on her face as she continued to obnoxiously chew her gum. Aizawa could only let out a mirthless, breathy laugh in response. Something to that effect, I guess. Well, I hate to tell you, Suga, but as far as I know, nobody here, nurse or otherwise, has green hair, eyes, or freckles. But if you're looking for another baby mama, and we're done. Thanks. Aizawa swiftly turned and walked away from the frizzy-haired bookkeeper. He stalked over to the vending machine and bought the soda he said he would. Once done, he walked back to Izuku. As Aizawa was walking up to Izuku, he saw Hitoshi exit out of his grandmother's room. Hitoshi was quietly wiping the tears away from his eyes, and once he was out in the hallway he gave himself a good shake. Izuku saw the tears fairly quickly and hugged Hitoshi tightly. Hitoshi put on a brave face and sniffled softly before wiping the rest of his tears away with his palm. "I'm fine. It's fine." Hitoshi sniffled again. "Just a lot of emotions at once." "Did you get to say goodbye?" Aizawa inquired as he threw the cherry cola to Hitoshi. Hitoshi nodded as he nervously tapped on the tab of the soda. "Yeah, as best as I could anyway. She didn't just see me as Dai. She saw me as Tsukato Shinsu, my grandfather." Hitoshi whispered. "That somehow feels better than being mistaken for my dad." He ran his fingers through his ponytail before sighing out. He then opened the can of soda and took a sip. "Can we just go now? Please. I don't know how much longer I can take being here." Tuesday rolled around fairly quickly, as it was the next day, and it was time for them to get their grade for the big assignment. Their group waited anxiously with bated breath as the teacher made her rounds, returning each assignment to each group of students. When finally she dropped theirs off in, a big red shone brightly on their combined assignment, and Hitoshi couldn't help it. He was grinning. "High five," Kaminari offered as he raised his right hand up. Izuku took up the mantle on that and slapped Kaminari's palm with his own. Izuku shrieked out in pain as he was, inevitably, shocked by Kaminari. "Fuck, that hurt." Izuku shook his hand violently. Hitoshi let out a surprised laugh at this. "I'm so sorry." Kaminari put his hands over his mouth in shock. "It's fine." Izuku shot back up in a second. "It was just a shock." Heh. Izuku grinned at the pun, to which Kaminari gave Izuku a thumbs up in response. Hitoshi smiled softly as he leaned back in his chair. "We did good. That's what you say." Hitoshi's eyes must have rolled all the way to the back of his head as Akisho's voice grated against his ears. "What do you want?" Hitoshi rolled his head back so he was now looking at Akisho upside down. "Ugh, I don't know how, but you'd somehow look uglier upside down." Hitoshi hissed as he sneered at Akisho. Akisho returned the sneer in full as he crossed his arms. "I'd say the same to you, but you've always been ugly. A face only a mother could love. Oh wait. Fuck you. I'd never give you the pleasure." "What do you want, Akisho?" Izuku asked as he crossed his arms over his chest and narrowed his eyes. "You three have been pissing me off lately. I know the three of you tried to get into UA. And I know UA is low on standards, but you three are just too below the bar. I'll be laughing when you get that rejection letter." Akisho sniggered. "You'll all be the laughing stock of this whole school. Then again, you three have always been that. And when you get your rejection letter, we'll make sure you never forget it." Kaminari could only grin as he crossed one leg over the other, all while shrugging at Akisho. "I would never apply to that school." Akisho snarled as he got into Kaminari's face. "Really? Because I'm pretty sure I saw you at the entrance exam." "What? Did Shikzuhai turn you down?" "Keep it up, Sparky. I can make you do whatever I want if you test me too hard. Try it, and you'll be standing in the middle of the main hallway naked." Hitoshi swiftly threatened as he stood from his chair now. He immediately wedged himself between Kaminari and Akisho. Akisho's nostril rose in a sneer as he took a step forward, so he and Hitoshi were practically nose to nose. Izuku came up to Kaminari's right and put himself slightly in front of the blonde as well. His arms crossed. "I appreciate it, guys, but I'm sure I can take Akisho myself." Kaminari gave an awkward laugh as he said this. There was a heavy silence between the two as Akisho and Hitoshi only glared at one another. "Go back to your boyfriends, Tora," Akisho hissed as he turned his back to Hitoshi. "We all know what you and Izuku do in your spare time. It's disgusting. Go fuck yourself." Hitoshi waved Akisho off. "You know, you're so obsessed with my brother and me it's almost scary. It's like you have a crush on us or something. Ugh, I'd rather lay with my own dog than have a Quirkless touch me." Akisho turned back to face Hitoshi before focusing back on Izuku. Akisho sneered one last time at Izuku before he then walked away, flipping them the bird as he did so. It was Izuku that spoke next, his eyebrow raised as he watched Akisho leave. Izuku didn't look so threatening now as he relaxed and put his hand to his chin and thought. "Interesting. What? That he's still a dick noodle?" Hitoshi asked as he went to sit back down. "Because I'm not surprised." "No, it's not that. It's nothing. Maybe I'm just thinking too much into things." Izuku then gave a shrug in response as he grabbed his bag and placed it in his lap. "It's just strange is all." Sad afternoon, 1:47 p.m. to be more specific, was when Izuku and Hitoshi both got UAS response letters. Their dad was away at UA to finish up his roster for next year's class. He'd be back before too long. To say both boys were excited was an understatement. They both looked at their envelopes that sat on the dining table while holding onto each other's arms. "I'm scared. I botched my exam. I don't know if I can do this." Izuku breathed out nervously while he clung to Hitoshi for dear life. "I know how you feel. Should we open them both at the same time?" Izuku shook his head. "It's a projection. I know the type. They'll just speak over each other and we won't hear it." Both brothers looked at each other, then back at the envelopes, afraid they might combust into ash any minute now. Should we wait for Dad? Hitoshi breathed out while he clung at Izuku's arms, digging his nails into his brother's soft flesh. No, it's a band-aid. We need to rip it off, to know if we got in or not. I'll just take mine to my room and you'll take yours. This way, it'll be a surprise, right? I guess. Though no brother made an attempt to remove himself from the other as they just stared long and hard at the packages on the table. Finally, with shaky hands, Izuku let go of Hitoshi's arms and reached for his letter. He paused just before grabbing it. His hand hesitated over the envelope before he simply snatched it up. All right, Izuku mumbled before he turned for his room. I can do this. He shut his door and seconds later he heard Hitoshi's own footsteps before his door shut as well. Izuku sat down at his desk and eagerly ripped the package open. The little projector instantly popped out and Izuku nearly dropped it in shock. Once it was secured in his hands, he gently placed it down on his desk, sat up straight, and pressed play. The little projection flickered for a second before All Might appeared right in front of Izuku. He was beaming from ear to ear with that familiar smile. Hello, young Tora. Or should I say younger Aizawa? That was quite a shock to learn, my boy. All Might awkwardly rubbed the front of his neck before shaking his head. Regardless of all that, I'm sorry for not getting in contact with you sooner. However, from what was graciously told to me by young old Aizawa, no, that doesn't feel right. You'll be surprised to learn that starting this upcoming new school year I will be teaching at UA. Someone from the other side of the camera got All Might's attention. I'm not grandstanding, okay. I'm moving along. All Might focused right back around to the camera. Regardless of all of that, getting the move on as they say. You will be happy to know that you passed the written exam with flying colors. Izuku knew that he had passed the written exam. His issue laid with the physical exam, the one he botched horribly. Izuku's legs started to shake up and down as he tapped his fingers anxiously against the edge of his desk. However, we both know on the practical test you only managed to score 6 points, which isn't exactly what UA was looking for. Izuku sighed and let his head hang. He failed. Pure and simple, he had one chance and he blew it to smithereens. Tears perked into the corners of his eyes and he squeezed his eyes shut tight. Hopefully there'll be room for him in the general studies at this point. That being said, though it is clear that you failed the practical exam, you'll be pleased to learn that there are other points you earn. Izuku looked back up at the projection. Other points. He could only think as he stared at All Might, with wide, wet eyes. You see, young Izuku, we, the judges, were looking for more than just smashing robots to bits and bolts. We were also looking for heroic people to earn rescue points. Young Izuku, you rescued that young girl even though it would have been easier for you to turn and run with the rest of the students. You risked life and limb for her, and for that, you get rescue points that bring your score up, but it doesn't end there. Remember the girl? Well, guess what? What goes around comes around in my book. Have a look. The scene on the projector changed and it showed the girl that Izuku had saved that day. She seemed to be approaching President Mike. Who's recording this, and why? Izuku thought for just a brief moment before he shook his head and focused on the scene in front of him. Well, hello, little listener. What can I do for you today? President Mike had asked as he smiled at the brown-haired girl. The girl blushed a little as she rubbed the back of her head. That boy that they wheeled away on a stretcher, I wanted to know if he was all right. Oh, yeah, he woke up not that long ago, actually. He'll be just fine. The girl sighed at that. That's a relief. I was really worried about him. I also wanted to ask a question. Is it possible for me to transfer some of my points over to him? You see, Mr. Mike, he would have gotten more points if he hadn't had stopped to help me, and I feel guilty. President Mike grinned at the girl before patting her head. You don't need to worry about that, little missy. That was when All Might came back on screen. It's really touching, and for her willing to sacrifice her points and for the fact that she helped rescue you as well. She also gets rescue points, and it doesn't just end with her either. That Ida boy, the one who managed to grab you out of the sky before you hit the ground. He also gets rescue points. The image flickered over to a video of Izuku falling only to be swiftly caught by. If I ever get my phone back, I need to thank him 1,000 times over. He really saved my hide back there. Izuku really didn't think about it at the time, but watching his own limbs flap aimlessly in the wind as he plummeted, unconscious, to what would have been his death, he owed a lot to Ida. All Might turned his head. Yes, I'm getting to it. All Might seemed to huff in annoyance before turning back to the camera once more. Young Izuku, you didn't pass the practical exam, but what you did do was pass the entrance exam with a grand total of 60 rescue points. So combined with the points you had accumulated, you made 66 points, more than enough to pass. Welcome, Izuku Aizawa, to UA High School. Izuku felt a feeling of euphoria flood his entire nervous system as happy tears now sprung into his eyes. His door slammed open and he turned to Hitoshi. Did you? Hitoshi was out of breath and he was smiling. By God, he was smiling ear to ear. I passed. Hitoshi let out a happy cry as he let out his own tears of happiness. So did I. You did it. Izuku shot up from his seat like it was on fire as he rushed towards Hitoshi. Both boys felt and looked like schoolgirls as they embraced and happily jumped up and down. We did it. Hitoshi laughed with him and Izuku kept the long embrace going. We're going to be heroes. We're going to be heroes. We're going to UA High School. Fuck yeah, we are. Of course, Aizawa knew ahead of his boys that they had gotten into UA. However, the way he found out was less than ideal. There he was, sitting at his desk in the teacher's lounge, looking over his roster for the new school year. He took down names and identified their quirks. At the same time, Vlad was a little less than happy about his own roster, so much so that he let Aizawa know about it numerous times. I swear Nenzu gives you the ones with the best quirks, Aizawa. My students, their quirks, they're okay. But look at yours. You got a boy who can make explosions. Or even Todoroki. That boy can make both fire and ice. And what do I get? A boy that can make. Vlad sighed heavily before continuing. Sticky balls pop off of his head. Aizawa snorted. Sucks to be you, I guess, was all Aizawa could say about it as he went back to his roster. He then stopped dead in his tracks. That can't be right. Aizawa frowned as he reread the names in front of him. Hitoshi Aizawa. Quirk, brainwashing. Izuku Aizawa. Quirk, superpower, object attraction. Got a student with a lame quirk finally. This has to be a mistake. Aizawa was up and out of his seat in a second. I mean, it's not a mistake that they're in the hero course. I'm glad they got accepted, but they shouldn't be with me. Aizawa felt more like Izuku as he muttered and walked away from Vlad and the teacher's dorm altogether. The roster was still in his hands as he immediately made his way to Nenzu's office. Despite it being said, Aizawa knew Nenzu was in his office. As he walked, his confusion turned to anger. This is no accident. That rodent just lives for drama. Aizawa scowled as he picked up the pace. He has to know this can't fly. They're my sons. I can't be their teacher. They have to go to Vlad. But then there was that other part of his brain. Vlad can't train them. I've been training them for years now. I know how they work. I'm their father. See, that right there is why I can't train them. He almost felt torn about this. Aizawa knocked on Nenzu's door. There was a moment of pause before "come on in." Aizawa opened the door. As he was walking up, Nenzu spoke. He was grinning, but it was a feral grin, one Aizawa knew all too well. Shouta, how are you liking your roster for next year? You put them in there on purpose. Aizawa snarled as he slammed the roster down on the desk. Hitoshi and Izuku cannot be in my class. I disagree. There wasn't even a moment of hesitation on Nenzu's part. He then turned in his chair and hopped down. Aizawa, you know your boys better than anybody. Who better to teach them? It opens the door for rumors of nepotism if word got out. Then keep their last name as Tora, I don't mind. Nenzu reached up for his teacup, which he took a sip on. Keep it hidden if you must. I can't. Besides, somebody has to watch Izuku with that new quirk of his. We all saw it. His bones break like twigs. He needs you, Shouta. You can erase his quirk at a moment's notice. Vlad can't do that. Fine. I can see Izuku. Hitoshi is different. He doesn't need me to teach him. Nenzu smiled that little feral smile once again. Aizawa could see it. The joy behind those beady little black eyes. I can't separate twins. It's unbecoming. Was all Nenzu had to say about that before he turned and sat right back down in his seat. He took one long over-exaggerated sip of his tea before placing it back down on its saucer. Is there anything else, Aizawa? No. Aizawa let out a long and heavy sigh. No, I guess not. He seethed out as he snatched his roster back up. This year is going to be fun. Nenzu giggled with joy before he cackled. He cackled so hard that his teacup shivered so violently in his little paws that the liquid was threatening to spill over the side. Fucking sadistic little rodent. Aizawa rubbed his temples as he stalked out of Nenzu's office. This year and the two following it is going to be a nightmare. Toshinori and Izuku finally got a moment to talk to one another. They decided to meet on the beach they cleaned together. It had been the day after Izuku and Hitoshi received their acceptance letters. All Might was standing there in his skinny form, waiting for Izuku. All Might, Izuku yelled in excitement as he jogged up to his hero and mentor. There was a spray of blood from All Might's mouth as he coughed out an uneasy. Who's that? All Might is here. A voice yelled in excitement off in the distance, and Izuku saw people standing on the pier just a little ways away from them. Say it was a mistake. All Might coughed again in a hurried semi-whisper to Izuku. Oh, my bad. He's not All Might. Izuku scrambled to cover his mistake. Boo, you suck. The man responded with a scoff. The two of them then stalked away. Both Toshinori and Izuku sighed out in relief. Once the coast was clear, the two looked at each other. I'm surprised it's just you. Aizawa told me clearly that we weren't allowed to be alone together anymore. Toshinori explained while looking around. He's on the roof. Izuku simply pointed off towards the road where a couple of expensive houses on stilts sat. There, on the top of the pointed roof of one of these houses, Aizawa stood or squatted on. He was zoned in on them, watching with interest. No doubt listening all the same. He didn't think he was needed since we aren't training. Just talking. Toshinori gave a small wave to Aizawa. It was not returned. Right, training is going to be interesting. Toshinori ticked his tongue at this before he turned back to Izuku. Regardless, you must be excited. Yes, I can't believe I actually got into UA. It's all so insane. Izuku couldn't help it. He started to happily stim his fingers by tapping them all together in a fast and rhythmic way. Toshinori only smiled at him. Yes, you worked hard. That being said, I do have to tell you something. I'm sorry. Dad and I wanted to keep it a secret from Hitchin, but he freaked out real bad. We had to tell him you gave me the quirk. Izuku's little stim died down as he hung his head. Forgive me, Toshinori sighed. I had a feeling. He pinched the bridge of his nose. He won't tell anybody, right? You have his word. Dad explained to him why it's imperative we keep this quiet. That's good. Why'd he freak out? I dunno. I told him I had a quirk and he just lost it. It really didn't help when I told him that someone gave me the quirk. Izuku gave a soft sigh as he remembered the night in question. He brainwashed me. He never uses his quirk on me. That is alarming. It almost sounds like he may have had a run-in with Toshinori looked at Izuku's confused face and trailed off. Never mind, it's not important. It's probably not who I'm thinking of anyways. Izuku nodded before smiling again. Regardless, you have my word, Hitchin won't tell a soul. He's not happy, but he knows it was my choice to do this. Toshinori gave a nod at this. Well, maybe it's for the best your immediate family knows. Less questioning that way, but please don't tell anybody else. You have my word. Nobody else will know. Good. Toshinori reached over and put a hand on Izuku's shoulder as he smiled at the young boy. We need to talk about training now. It's odd to me that you haven't grasped one for all right away. I never had this problem when one for all was transferred to me. Yes, well, Izuku isn't you. It was like he teleported as Aizawa was now directly behind Toshinori. A warning, Aizawa. Aizawa had startled Toshinori so badly that it accidentally caused the older man to puff up into All Might by accident. There was a gush of blood that exited All Might's mouth before he immediately reverted back down into Small Might. Warn a guy when you do that. Aizawa ignored Toshinori's yell and simply lightly hit the top of Toshinori's head with the downside of his fist. It clearly didn't hurt as it was less than a tap of pressure. Izuku isn't you. You can't compare him to yourself. You may have immediately understood how this power works, but he doesn't. We need to fix that as soon as possible so he's not always breaking his bones. Izuku, show him. I had a theory that I could maybe displace my power. So, with Dad's permission, I threw a ball to see how far I could throw it using one for all. I used the power with my fingers instead of my arm. The ball went pretty far and my theory was right. But Izuku made an ashamed face as he pulled up his right sleeve to show Toshinori his two main fingers bandaged and were placed in a splint. Toshinori was gentle as he grabbed the injured hand to inspect it. Izuku's index and middle fingers were purple in color as well as tied together with the splint. Leading down from his two fingers was a brace attaching around his wrist to limit movement to his two fingers. Does it hurt? Aizawa didn't even hesitate as he smacked the back of Toshinori's head. Toshinori flinched at the sudden attack. Does that hurt, jackass? Point taken, thank you, Aizawa. Toshinori's voice was curt as he rubbed at the back of his head. I can handle it. Izuku smiled at Toshinori. I have a really high pain tolerance. Once when I was 8 I dislocated my shoulder and didn't even scream. Hitchin did though. That he does have. I've never seen a child with such a high pain tolerance. Aizawa clicked his tongue against the roof of his mouth a few times as he shook his head. I see. Toshinori gave Izuku his hand back. So you can put power behind your limbs. Yeah, but I still break my bones. Yes, we should get together for training. So we can stop this from happening. The sooner the better in my book. Toshinori smiled and placed his hands on his hips. When's a good time for you, Aizawa? I'm thinking once his fingers heal. And taking him to see Recovery Girl tomorrow. Hopefully this will be the last time we bug that poor old woman. Aizawa reached across and pulled on Izuku's ear. Not enough to hurt but enough to gain his attention. Look, I don't want you constantly going to Recovery Girl with broken bones when you're in UA. She knows I'm your father and it reflects back on me. Understood. Izuku slightly whimpered and Aizawa let go of his ear. Now, Aizawa focused back around to Toshinori. I've already set him up for Quirk counseling. That'll start next week. Combined with his acrobatics classes once a week, training with me, studies, and now with his memory appointment. His what? Toshinori blinked in surprise. You never told him. Aizawa swiftly looked at Izuku. Izuku's eyes went wide as he tried to think back to his talks with Toshinori. All the times they were alone together, Izuku never once brought up his missing memories. No, I don't think I did. I'm sorry, All Might. I'm missing memories. There was a spray of blood that released from Toshinori's mouth like a wild fountain. It's not chronic, I should say. I'm missing the first 5 years of my life, and a more recent memory that's cause for alarm. So, once a month we're having a lady dig through my memories to try and fix what's been wiped. Wiped, meaning, yes, someone removed those memories. We don't know who or why. Aizawa finished for Toshinori as he shoved his hands into his pants pockets. For 2 to 3 days after the memory appointments, Izuku will basically be out of commission. This lady is the best, but her quirk, it'll make him physically sick. If it wasn't important, I wouldn't usually be putting Izuku through this. Aizawa reached over and lightly placed his hand on top of Izuku's head. I see. Toshinori looked at Izuku. What was so private that a villain felt the need to take your memories from you, my boy? I believe it was the same person who kidnapped Hitchin and I when we were 5. There was another gusher of blood. And unfortunately, Toshinori was standing just a little too close to Izuku when this one happened. Kidnapped. Flecks of blood landed directly on Izuku's face, causing the boy to grimace before he awkwardly wiped at his face. All it did was smear the blood. "You," was all Izuku could say as his face twisted in disgust. Sorry. Toshinori quickly fumbled for something to wipe the blood up with. Then it happened. Toshinori only watched as Aizawa, with one hand, grabbed Izuku's chin, forcing his son to look at him. He then used the edge of his scarf to wipe Izuku's face. Only it wasn't exactly a gentle wipe. Toshinori tried his hardest not to laugh as Aizawa did a quick, but aggressive wipe to all of Izuku's face like he was a toddler. Dad, I'm not a baby." Izuku immediately tried to pry Aizawa's hands off of him. Shush, it didn't work. Aizawa was still much stronger than Izuku in that regard. In fact, all it took was a small wrist slap from Aizawa and Izuku immediately gave up. Eventually, Aizawa removed the edge of his scarf from Izuku's face. It was cleaner now, though there was still a smudge on Izuku's left cheek. Nope, Aizawa immediately wiped it up with the same force as before. Toshinori couldn't be sure, but he thought maybe Aizawa accidentally wiped a freckle or two off of Izuku with how much force he had used. Done. Finally, the scarf was lowered. Thanks. There was no actual gratitude in Izuku's voice as he said this. It was cute. The whole ordeal was just adorable, and Toshinori wasn't expecting it, which was the best part of seeing Aizawa be so fatherly towards Izuku. Aizawa has always been a hard-ass, especially towards his students and fellow teachers, so to see a softer side was welcoming. "I'm not wiping your face," Aizawa suddenly said in a deadpan voice, reminding Toshinori that he still had blood dripping down his chin and neck. "Sorry, I got distracted." Toshinori found his handkerchief in his pocket and quickly wiped the blood away from his mouth. "Young Izuku, you were really kidnapped as a child?" "Yes." He stated it like a question, which was concerning. "Hitchin knows what happened more than I do. He's the one with his memories still intact. What does he remember?" "I can't tell you." Izuku's response had been breathy, scared almost. His eyes went wide, and his skin paled, making his freckles stand out predominantly on his face. He put his hand to his mouth as if he himself were reliving the memory. "That's none of your business, Toshinori." Aizawa, on the other hand, turned aggressive in less than a second. His teeth slightly bared, a snarl on his lips, his shoulders squared and muscles tense. Toshinori put his hands up. "I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking when I asked. I shouldn't have pried." There was a moment of silence before both family members relaxed again. "Let's just move on." Aizawa sighed as he rubbed at a knot in his shoulder before he rolled his head from side to side. "Please, training time." Aizawa shut his eyes. "Next week, school will be over by that time. Monday morning, my house, 9 a.m. Sounds like a plan." It wasn't until the literal last day of school did Kaminari finally get the results from UA back. Izuku was afraid for a minute, as was Kaminari. "We're all going to be heroes." Kaminari scooped Izuku and Hitoshi into a tight hug as he grinned ear to ear. All three of them got accepted into UA. It was almost surreal for Izuku to learn. He really feared at least one of them would be rejected, namely himself, but that's not the case. They all got in, and they'll all become heroes. Izuku felt eyes on him, and he turned to see Akisho glaring daggers. The moment they locked eyes, Akisho looked away with an eye roll. There were no boisterous threats from Akisho, no insults. In fact, he looked rather quiet. His silence told Izuku enough. But that being the last day of their middle school experience, the teacher really didn't have anything planned with finals finished up, so a lot of teachers simply allowed the students to talk amongst themselves. Kaminari immediately planted his butt on top of his desk once they were done hugging. "Oh man, I can't wait. Do you think we'll be in the same class?" he eagerly asked as he swung his feet back and forth excitedly. "Dunno, there are 2 classes for the heroic course, so there is a possibility we get different classes," Izuku commented as he took his seat on his own desk. Hitoshi almost seemed to pale a little at that as he stared at his shoes. "I hope we don't," he whispered almost nervously. It was like Kaminari read Hitoshi's mind at that moment, and he smiled. "Please, you two are twins. There's no way you'll get separated." Kaminari laughed as he slapped Hitoshi on the shoulder. Izuku spoke next, slightly leaning into Kaminari's right. "I don't think he was just talking about us, Kami. I'm pretty sure he wants you to be in that class as well." Hitoshi instantly tensed a little. Nope wasn't nah. He tried to wave it off, but there was a faint dust of pink across his cheeks, one he was trying, and failing, to hide. "Totally just talking about Suchin." Hitoshi immediately looked down at the floor in a last-ditch attempt to hide his face. Izuku and Kaminari looked at each other before they both started grinning. Sure, whatever you say, Hichin. Izuku leaned back against his desk and smiled. Huh, what happened here, Zuku? Suddenly Izuku's right hand was grabbed by Kaminari. His index and middle finger had healed, obviously, but there was still some bruising from Recovery Girl as she didn't heal them completely. They were usable, but sore. It's nothing. I accidentally slammed them into the car door. Izuku lied with a shrug. It doesn't hurt, so no worries. Kaminari shuddered violently at that. Urgh, I can't imagine. Izuku brought his hand back down and smiled at Kaminari. Still, in the back of his mind, a little voice was speaking. He's gonna know once you're in UA that you have a quirk now. You should tell him. Obviously not the whole truth. Just lie and say you realized you were misdiagnosed. Izuku blinked before looking down at his bruised fingers. Later, he decided. Time ticked on with the three of them casually talking about their plans for UA. Izuku was even brave enough to show Kaminari his potential hero costume. Akisho shooting looks their way the whole time. Soon, the bell rang and it was time for lunch. I have to go to the restroom. Could you please take my bento up to the roof? Izuku asked as he handed his lunchbox to Hitoshi. Yeah, just hurry up or I'll eat all of your sticky rice. Hitoshi smirked as he took his brother's lunchbox. You better not. Izuku pouted as his brother and Kaminari made their way out of the classroom. Izuku only huffed before he walked the opposite way of his brother and towards the nearest bathroom. Izuku did what he needed to do, flushed. And it wasn't until he was in the middle of washing his hands did the bathroom door open. Izuku wanted to roll his eyes when Akisho stalked inside. Izuku decided to just keep his head down and go past Akisho. But Akisho hadn't moved from the door. In fact, Akisho had his back on the door. It wasn't until Izuku finally looked up did Akisho finally move. His movement. He locked the deadbolt of the bathroom door. Oh shit, Izuku thought as he flicked the excess water off of his hands into the sink. Izuku didn't speak. Akisho didn't speak. No, both of them just stared intensely at each other. After a few more minutes of just staring, Izuku finally broke the silence. Whatever you're thinking, don't. It won't end well. Are you threatening me? Akisho sneered as he took a step closer towards Izuku. Izuku took a step back. No, Akisho, I'm not. What? You think just because you got into UA you can boss me around now? No, suddenly, Izuku saw a hand coming for him. Out of reflex, Izuku ducked down, out of Akisho's reach and swiftly jumped to the side. He rammed his shoulder directly into a stall in an attempt to get away. Akisho made another attempt to grab at Izuku. Izuku managed to jump out of the way, but only just barely. If you make another grab at me, I'll be forced to defend myself. I don't want to attack you, Akisho. Izuku made sure to yell this out loud enough for his voice to reverberate off of the tiled walls of the bathroom. Akisho narrowed his eyes before he started to visibly grind his teeth. How did you get into the UA heroic class but I didn't? How could someone who's quirkless be able to even step foot into UA? I should have taken that spot. It belonged to me and me alone. Izuku sighed out. Akisho, I'm sorry. I refuse to be pitied by the likes of you. Akisho, once again, went to grapple Izuku. Izuku ducked, but followed through with his threat. He managed to duck under Akisho's right arm, and he wrapped one arm on Akisho's bicep, and then grabbed Akisho's wrist with both of his hands and forced it to bend downwards. Akisho cried out in pain as he nearly crumpled to his knees as Izuku applied uncomfortable pressure down on Akisho's wrist. Please, Akisho. Akisho was smiling, his breath uneasy while sweat formed at his brow. Yua's eyes turned deadly as his smile turned completely sinister. Fucked up. Akisho used his free hand to slam his palm directly into the side of Izuku's face. Izuku tasted blood and the sudden force of the attack made him take a startled step back. He fell into a stall door that wasn't locked. The door swung open from Izuku's weight and he fell to the floor, smacking his head on the side of the toilet. Izuku's head swam for a second, maybe two, as he hit the floor beside the toilet. Izuku went to stand, but all he felt was a flood of pain erupt against his face as Akisho kicked Izuku directly in the face. Izuku's body reacted swiftly as he suddenly kicked his own leg out, getting Akisho directly in the knee. Akisho fell to the ground as his knee gave out. Izuku scrambled to his feet and in less than a second he managed to tackle Akisho around the middle. There wasn't much of a struggle as Izuku now had the upper hand, pinning Akisho's arms above his head. Now, calm down. Izuku hissed between clenched teeth. He could feel his nose bleeding and watched as several fat droplets landed directly on Akisho's face. There was a few seconds of silence before Akisho sniffled suddenly. I don't understand. Tears sprung into the corners of Akisho's eyes. You're quirkless. You're supposed to be weak. I'm sorry to disappoint you, Akisho. But I'm not weak just because I'm quirkless. Akisho tried to struggle against Izuku's grip, but it did nothing. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I was supposed to be the one to go to UA. I thought if you were out of the picture, you'd get Hitchin all to yourself. Izuku finished with a head tilt and Akisho's face turned red. Be it from embarrassment or anger, Izuku didn't know. I figured it out when Hitchin accused you of having a crush on one of us. You said you'd never lay with someone quirkless, and I figured Kaminari hadn't been here long enough for you to form a crush on him. You never mentioned Hitchin in that conversation. Akisho hissed as he looked away from Izuku. Fine, fine. You think you're so smart, asshole. Did you know that Hitoshi actually knows this? Izuku blinked in surprise. What? There's no way. I confessed to him at the start of the year. I told him how I've been crushing on him since elementary school. And you know what your brother did? Akisho leaned his neck up so he and Izuku were nose to nose. He laughed. He told me that he could never be with me because I made you wander out in traffic once. We were 10, and he refused to let it go. It's always been about you when it comes to Hitoshi. Always. The funny thing is, I'm being stupid. I know I am. I told myself, if you don't get into the hero course, then maybe, just maybe, Hitoshi will move on with his life without you. But I know. I fucking know. If you wouldn't have gotten into the hero course in UA, Hitoshi would turn down his own spot to be with you. He wouldn't. He would, Izuku. He would turn down everything if it means being by your side. He loves you so much that he doesn't see other people. They mean nothing to Hitoshi. Izuku felt his eyes soften as he sighed and slowly got off of Akisho and sat on his butt. You could have used your quirk on me multiple times in this fight, but you didn't. Akisho sat up on his thigh and pushed his frizzy hair back from his face with one of his hands. I couldn't, Akisho whispered softly as he lowered his eyes to the dirty tiled floor beneath them. You know that day I had you walk into traffic. I was just trying to show off. I wanted to impress him. Instead, I made him hate me from that day onward. Izuku frowned before he stood up. He wiped his hands off on his pants and reached out for Akisho. Akisho looked at Izuku's hand before sighing and taking Izuku's hand into his own. Also, sorry for kicking you in the face. Izuku turned to look at himself in the mirror. His nose didn't look broken, thank God, but it had been bleeding by the dried and crusted blood that trailed down from his nostrils, chin, and ending at the base of his neck. Easy cleanup. Hitoshi is going to kill me. He won't know. Consider it a graduation present. Izuku turned on the tap to the sink and grabbed a paper towel from the holder. He ran it under the cold water, and once it was saturated with water, he wrung it out and started to dab at the blood under his nose. Izuku was painfully aware that Akisho was right behind him, watching him try and wash away the evidence. Izuku looked over his shoulder at Akisho. Go on. Izuku gestured his head towards the door before he went right back to wiping the blood off of his face. Thank you. I'll see you around. Akisho's shoulders slumped a little, yet he had a small smile on his face as he left the bathroom. Izuku sighed and winced a little when the cold paper towel pressed against a sensitive part of his nose. Yep, that's gonna swell, he mumbled once he saw the tender red skin already starting to puff up on the left side of his nose. He also saw a bit of a bruise forming just under his right eye. And as far as anybody is going to know, I tripped and slammed into a locker. And that's exactly what he told Hitoshi and Kaminari when he finally got to the roof. Izuku's exact words were, I'm sorry I'm late. You won't believe it. I tripped on my own damn shoelace and slammed directly into an open locker. He yelled in mock frustration and even threw his hands up for good measure. Kaminari didn't suspect a thing, and if Hitoshi suspected anything, he only let it show once. When he flickered his eyes from the bruise on Izuku's face and frowned. Hitoshi didn't voice his concerns once, which was interesting, and Izuku figured it was because when he finally got to open his bento. You jerk. Izuku threw his chopsticks at a laughing Hitoshi. I warned you I'd eat your rice. Toshinori felt like his every move was being watched. Because it was. As he lightly sparred with young Izuku, he was being watched by both Aizawa and Izuku's twin brother. Man, he could feel Hitoshi's anger from where he was standing. What happened to your face? Toshinori asked as he pointed to the bruise on the side of Izuku's nose and right under his eye. The bruise under Izuku's right eye was what caught Toshinori's attention. The bruise was dark, almost black in the process of healing, but it was curved downwards in a perfect arch. I tripped and ran into a locker. Izuku responded with a smile. Young Izuku, that bruise under your eye is curved, almost like a shoe. That's the curve of the top of a shoe. Somebody kicked him in the face. Toshinori realized it fairly quickly, and if Toshinori figured it out that quickly, there wasn't a single doubt in his mind that Aizawa already knew it just as well. Izuku's eyes went wide as he looked at Toshinori. So, he's keeping a secret. Very well. Never mind. I was thinking of something else. Besides, it's not that important. Toshinori smiled, and that made Izuku visibly relax. So, one for all, Toshinori saw it out of the corner of his eye. Hitoshi visibly shuddered like a cold wind smacked him right down the spine. I need to ask, when you were training with your father the other day, how did it feel right before you put the power behind your fingers? Izuku swallowed as he looked at the two fingers in question. They looked good as new, save for some slight bruising. I don't know if I can properly explain it, but if I could, it felt like a bunch of power all at once right before my fingers broke. Kind of like, I don't know, putting a raw egg in the microwave and waiting for it to explode. A little lamer than what I was expecting, but I guess as good of an analysis as any, Toshinori admitted. So, I think the best exercise for you here is control. You're using way too much power from what I'm gathering. Your body can't handle it all, hence the broken bones. Izuku put his fingers to his chin as he thought. That would make sense. I've been going from nothing to 100% of power since I got this quirk, so the next best action would be to lower my percentage. But what would be a good percent to start at? And what if I go just slightly over the percentage needed? What if I do just a 0%? Would that be possible? Mutter. Toshinori blinked as Izuku rapidly fired questions at him. How can one kid talk so fast? Aizawa calmly strolled up to Izuku and simply put his hand on top of Izuku's head and twisted said head so Izuku was now facing him. Then, Aizawa flicked Izuku's forehead. It was a gentle flick, one Toshinori would even describe as lovingly. Well, as lovingly as a flick to the forehead could be. Stop thinking so much about it, Aizawa told him in a soft voice before he walked back to the spot he was standing at previously. Right, sorry. Izuku rubbed his forehead. So, what you're saying is that I should lower my percentage down to a reasonable amount and gradually build from there. Izuku focused back around at Toshinori. Yes, that would be best, but for now we need to see if you really can lower how much power you put behind your attacks. You're right. Izuku immediately turned his head to his dad. Can we? Aizawa's lips thinned into a line. We just healed your fingers, Izuku. But I know we need to know if you can lower or change the amount of power you can use, so. Aizawa sighed. Use your left hand. I'll get a doctor ready. Aizawa grumbled the last part as he took out his phone. Someone other than Recovery Girl. She'll have my head. Here Hitoshi grabbed a nearby ball and tossed it. Toshinori was a little startled when he heard the ball jingle and he soon realized it was a cat toy Hitoshi had tossed. A little ball with a bell in the middle. Toshinori silently came up behind Izuku as Izuku put the ball in his left hand. Okay, I want you to only use your fingers when tossing this ball up. We want the ball to come back to us, so keep your palm up and only toss the ball in the air, not away from you. Toshinori instructed calmly as he guided Izuku's hand the way he wanted it. Izuku rested the ball between his thumb, index, and middle finger on his left hand. If you can, only try and use these two like you did on your other hand. Toshinori touched Izuku's middle and index finger. Understood. Izuku stiffened his body up as he was preparing to toss the ball. How low do you want me to go percentage-wise? As low as you can possibly go, my boy. Okay, I'm ready. Toshinori backed up a step and gave Izuku room. Izuku sucked in a soft breath, exhaled, before he had a determined look on his face. He moved his left hand down and the whole world just seemed to pause. It went dead silent between all parties. Then, Izuku tossed the ball in. It rose about maybe 3 inches in the air before it fell to the ground with a soft jingle of the bell. Okay, so that was no percentage. Turns out I went a little too low on that one, Izuku explained as he leaned down to pick the ball right back up. Let's try that again. Toshinori exhaled a breath he had been holding. Yes, my boy, let's. When Izuku did try again, the ball definitely went a lot higher than before. It went as high as the roof of Aizawa's house, which had to be a story high. Toshinori had been so focused on the cat toy that when Izuku made a sound of pain it immediately made him look in Izuku's direction. Izuku was cradling his fingers to his chest while gritting his teeth from the obvious pain. The fingers were most definitely broken. That's good. Izuku smiled through his pain. That was absolutely lower than last time. What was it last time, Dad? 700 meters. Why yeah, I lowered the percentage. I tried to visualize the egg in the microwave when I did it and it helped. I think I lowered it to about 40%, maybe a little lower than that. It's not an exact science, but it's something. Izuku let go of his fingers and Toshinori saw just how bad it looked close up. Izuku's fingers were absolutely broken. The two fingers a deep unnatural shade of purple. The bones, though not visible, had to be broken in two by the grimace that Izuku was trying his best to hide. So, even 40% is too dangerous. Hitoshi grumbled as he approached Izuku. How much lower do you need to go in order to stop breaking your bones because, broken bones aren't a good look on anyone. Hitoshi then gently grabbed Izuku's palm and kindly held onto Izuku's hand. Being mindful of the two very obvious broken fingers, Hitoshi lightly rubbed his hand up and down Izuku's wrist in an attempt to soothe Izuku's pain without going near his fingers. As low as I can make it. There has to be a percent. I'll go down even lower next time. 10%, maybe even 5%. Hell, I can use my ring and pinky finger right now if you want. No, it was unanimous all across the board as everyone, except Izuku, shut that idea down instantly. Please, young Izuku, don't keep hurting yourself. I know you're eager and we're getting somewhere, but it's best if we take this slow. Toshinori put a hand on Izuku's shoulder. Toshinori heard a grumble and immediately recognized it as Hitoshi. He had spoken low, under his breath, that it was hard to make out. Izuku hadn't heard it at the very least, but Toshinori had. His years in heroics always kept his ears sharp, so to hear potential villains nearby, he never should have gotten that dangerous quirk, was what Hitoshi had grumbled as he continued to gently caress Izuku's wrist. Hitoshi's eyes flickered to Toshinori for a moment before focusing right back on his brother. Aizawa approached. Leave us to talk, okay? A healer is on their way. Come on, Zuchin. Let's ice your fingers. Hitoshi needed no more incentive to get Izuku away from Toshinori. The two of them soon disappeared into the house. Is it me, or does he hate me? Toshinori asked once he and Aizawa were alone. Hitoshi, don't take it to heart. He doesn't hate you, he hates the quirk. Aizawa approached a little more with his hands in his pockets. I don't blame him. I hate that damn quirk just as well. Aizawa confessed. But we're stuck with it. He gave his head a short shake. Don't worry, Aizawa. I can say with confidence that we'll get Izuku up to speed in no time. Between you, me, and a quirk counselor, Izuku will stop breaking his bones. You better fucking hope so, Toshinori. I'm getting kind of sick having his bones reset. Toshinori didn't reply right away as he peered inside the house. He could see Hitoshi holding onto Izuku's right hand as they held his left hand in a bath of ice water. Come on, let's go inside and wait for the healer. You thirsty? No, I should probably take off actually. Toshinori looked at his phone for the time. I have a feeling training is over anyways. Aizawa snorted in response. Fine, have it your way. Just break my child's bones and leave. Heh, I didn't think you had a sense of humor, Aizawa. Aizawa gave yet another snort in response to Toshinori's comment, but he didn't verbally respond this time around. He opened the sliding door to the house and allowed Toshinori to walk through first. Izuku turned his head towards Toshinori and tried once again to smile through his pain. We'll try again later. I'll go even lower, I promise. Izuku's voice was a little unsteady, but his smile was unwavering. Just don't push yourself, my boy. I think your family would rather you be in one piece, right, young Hitoshi? Hitoshi didn't respond as he just looked away from Toshinori. When it became clear that Hitoshi wasn't going to respond, Toshinori only nodded to himself. Well, I'm going to take off. Take care. Goodbye, All Might. Izuku kept the smile on his face as he turned to focus right back to his hand in the bowl of ice water. Oh, Izuku gasped suddenly as Hitoshi shoved a little round red pill into his mouth. Ibuprofen. It'll help with the pain. How long were you carrying that on you? What, are you a lawyer? Toshinori made his escape after that. The healer that Aizawa had called wasn't as efficient as Recovery Girl, so by the time the first day of UA had come, his 2 fingers on his left hand were still in a brace. They'd only need a day or 2 more before the splint could be fully removed. Both boys stood in front of UAS doors and Izuku slowly reached a hand out. Hitoshi didn't even need to look. He took Izuku's good hand into his own. People just kept on walking by the duo without even giving them a second glance. I can't believe we did it. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up. Hitoshi whispered softly to Izuku. I know, I feel the same way. Izuku tightened his grip on Hitoshi's hand. Our first steps into UA. Hitoshi and Izuku both sucked in a slow and deep breath before together they both lifted their right legs and took one big step into the school in unison. To Class 1A, Izuku suddenly demanded boldly. To Class 1A, Hitoshi yelled at him and the two of them were off. They walked down the hallway, each giddy with excitement. I hope Kami and Ida are in the same class as us. Izuku smiled. If Ida got in, that is. He finished in a softer voice. Honestly, Zuchin, I'm just glad you and I are in the same class. I wouldn't have it any other way, you know. Izuku frowned a little as he was forced back to what Akisho had said on the last day of middle school. That Hitoshi would have probably given up his spot in the heroic course if Izuku hadn't gotten in. Would the same be true if they would have gotten different classrooms as well? Izuku didn't know. As they approached classroom 1A, pushing past a few straggling students, they both became aware of yelling. It was muffled, harsh, and scolding. It sounded like it was coming from 1A. Hitoshi approached the door first and put his ear to it. He then turned to Izuku and nodded, confirming that the yelling was indeed coming from their classroom. Oh boy, sounds like we got the rowdy class this year. Izuku sighed with a smile. Let's just hope they don't bring us down. He then reached for the doorknob and opened it. You are disgracing UA. I must demand you put your feet down on the ground where they belong. Ida scolded in a loud voice as he chopped his hand at the blonde boy he was currently berating. Izuku tilted his head. This blonde, he looked familiar, like an actor you see on a TV show. One you recognize but you don't know the name of. His hair was spiked out in all different directions, reminding Izuku of an explosion. His eyes were candy red in color, piercing and full of anger. He had a nasty sneer on his face as he looked at Ida. Fuck off, glasses. The blonde all but yelled in response to Ida. Go bug one of these other extras. Hey, just who are you calling an extra? A familiar voice chimed in. Kami. Izuku immediately put the angry blonde to the back of his mind as Kaminari came into his view. Zuko, same class, same class. Izuku happily leaped a few paces before rushing to hug Kaminari. Same class? Yeah. Oh, it's you. Another familiar voice chimed in as a girl entered the room. Izuku spun around and smiled as his face suddenly turned red. It was the girl from the entrance exam. She smiled as she approached Izuku. I was hoping you'd be in the same class as me. Right. I was hoping to see you again too. Thank you. No, I should be thanking you. The girl got really close to his face as she grinned happily at Izuku. You really saved me back there in the entrance exam. Can I get your name, please? Izuku knew he was blushing as he tried to lamely hide his face behind his arms. Is Izuku Tora? He whispered. Achako Uraraka. She extended her hand out for a handshake and Izuku gently took it in return. Zuchin, care to explain? Hitoshi leaned into Izuku's right. Yeah, Zuko, care to explain? Kaminari was more teasing as he leaned into Izuku's right. Tora, I'm so glad to see you're all right. Ada came skirting over as he put two big hands on Izuku's shoulders. You had me worried. Not only that, but I apologize. I assumed you couldn't handle the entrance exam and I was wrong. It's okay, Ada. Thank you. I think I would have died if you hadn't leapt up and saved me. Izuku had spun around to face Ada. What in the world happened during your entrance exam, Zuko? Izuku, Ada, and the Achako all opened their mouths to respond, but they didn't get a chance as the blonde boy from before suddenly spoke. Is this a fucking joke? Everyone turned towards him. The boy had his feet down on the ground now. His fists were clenched up top his desk as he was just glaring at Izuku, like Izuku had personally snubbed his family or something. The boy's teeth were gnashed together and his jaw was grinding so hard that he could hear his teeth clicking against one another. I'm sorry. Izuku smiled awkwardly as he faced the boy. Apparently, that was the wrong thing to say as the boy shot from his seat and suddenly rushed at Izuku with such anger and speed that made Izuku flinch. He took a step back and tripped over someone's backpack. But thankfully, Ada came to his aid and managed to grab him before he fell to the ground. Is this a joke? Fucking Deku. The boy had screamed at him. Deku. The boy didn't get to Izuku. Hitoshi was quicker than anybody else. He swung his arm out right before the stranger got to Izuku, catching the boy straight to the chest with the side of his closed fist. There was an audible thump when Hitoshi's fist made contact with the boy's sternum. The boy was instantly thrown off of his momentum and gasped out in surprise before he stumbled back over his own 2 feet. Several loud, painful gasps left the boy's mouth as he grasped at his chest where Hitoshi had struck. What the fuck is your problem? Hitoshi snarled out. What's going on? Another girl, one that was invisible, save for the clothes on her back, had asked as she came in. More people came in surrounding the trio. Okay, this has gone too far. Ada had remained calm as he got between the blonde boy and Hitoshi. Can everybody please get to their seats? The blonde got to his feet and glared at Izuku before focusing right at Hitoshi. And who are you to go to Deku's aid? He pointed at Hitoshi and dared to take another step forward towards Hitoshi. But Ada kept his stance firm and refused to move, keeping himself as a barrier of sorts. Hitoshi's shoulders squared. I don't know who this Deku is, but I know you went straight for my brother and so I responded appropriately. Hitoshi hissed right back. I don't handle threats to my family well. This caused the boy to blink in surprise. Your brother. He then turned angry. It seemed anger was just the blonde's default emotion. His eyes almost seemed to go comically wide as he got even angrier. It reminded Izuku of an angry dog, a chihuahua or a similar breed. Do you think I'm fucking stupid? I do. Hitoshi smirked. I'll kill you, you Barney the dinosaur wannabe. The blonde absolutely roared in rage. I have been standing here for over 30 seconds. Several students cried out in alarm and twisted towards the door of the classroom where their teacher was standing in the middle of the doorway standing inside of a sleeping bag. Izuku tensed almost immediately at the voice. It was. Hitoshi and Izuku shared a look as their father removed himself from his sleeping bag. For a moment the two brothers both had telepathy. Did you know? Izuku silently asked in surprise. No. Hitoshi shook his head in response as they looked back at their father. I am Shouta Aizawa, your homeroom teacher, but you will call me Mr. Aizawa. Oh shit, Izuku thought as his father strolled straight to the podium. I want all of your butts in your seats the moment I step through that door. Do I make myself clear? Aizawa snarled and kicked his sleeping behind his desk. Well, why are you all still standing? Butts in chairs. He hissed impatiently and immediately everybody scrambled for their seats. It is absolutely unacceptable and I expect you all to work getting into your seat before I arrive. Understood? Yes, sensei, was what mostly everybody said. Good, now I'll be saying roll. If I call your name I want you to respond. Izuku quickly learned the boy's name. Bakugo Katsuki. When his name was called he yelled out. I'm here and none of you extras forget it. I'm better than all of you. Jesus, does this guy have an ego or what? Hitoshi whispered into Izuku's ear. Izuku bit his lip in a smile. Izuku Tora. Here. Hitoshi Tora. Right here. Good. The both of you will be known at Tora I and Tora H. Understood? Yes, sir. Bakugo twisted his head over his shoulder to glare at Izuku. When they locked eyes, he immediately sneered at Izuku but didn't say anything. What did I do to make him hate me? Izuku thought to himself before he looked out of the window for a moment. Eventually, Aizawa finished up the roll call and he looked at all 20 students before him. Good. Now, everybody stand up and I want you to go to the locker rooms and change into your gym uniforms. We're going outside today. There was a murmur of confusion amongst everyone as they looked around at one another. Kirishima, a boy with red spiky hair, asked already. It's only the first day of school. Kaminari gave an awkward laugh. Zero smiled. This man doesn't waste time. But what about orientation? Achako inquired. Aizawa growled. His hair suddenly raised and his eyes turned red. If I wanted your opinions or questions, I would have asked for them. When I tell you guys to do something, you do it, no questions. Am I clear? The class stilled and quieted down in less than a second. Good. Now, go to the locker rooms. I'll explain the rest after you've all changed. The students all quickly got to their feet and stalked towards the door. However, Tora H, stay. I want a word with you. Hitoshi and Izuku both stopped immediately as the others swiftly walked by them. It didn't take long before the classroom was completely empty and it left the three of them. Once the door was shut, Aizawa crossed his arms over his chest. Wanna explain what I walked into earlier? Hitoshi, fighting. On the first day, Aizawa seethed in rage as he got right into Hitoshi's face. He charged at Zuchin. Hitoshi whispered and Izuku nodded. I swear, I wasn't looking for a fight. I did what I did out of defense. Also, why did you tell us you'd be our teacher? Don't change the subject, Hitoshi. The boy, just out of the blue, got super combative and yelled at me. He looked like he was going to beat me. I swear we didn't do anything. Izuku whispered, backing his brother up. Aizawa shut his eyes before sighing and getting out of Hitoshi's face. I'm going to look at the cameras and I swear if you both are lying. We're not. Both Hitoshi and Izuku responded at the same time. I mean it. No more fighting. Understood? Yes, Dad. Izuku nodded slowly and ducked his head down. Yeah, loud and clear. Hitoshi shoved his fists into his pants pockets. Good. Go get changed. By the time Izuku and Hitoshi managed to get to the changing rooms, Bakugo had already gotten changed and was gone. Thank goodness, Izuku thought. Kaminari was waiting for them. Dude, did you two get in trouble? Kaminari asked as the two of them got to their lockers and started to strip. No, he just wanted to know what the ruckus was. Hitoshi answered first as he took his shirt off and tossed it haphazardly into his locker. Izuku was a little more polite as he neatly folded his shirt. Kaminari stuttered and Izuku was sure his brain literally short-circuited. Izuku looked over his shoulder to see Kaminari, red in the face, steam practically coming out of his ears as he stared intensely at Hitoshi's shirtless form. Interesting reaction, Izuku thought. He better get out of here. He might faint if he sees Hitchin without his pants. Izuku started to unbutton his own pants as he thought this. I like this fabric. Hitoshi mumbled to himself as he rubbed the hem of the gym shirt between his thumb and index finger. Breathable and cool. Izuku could see what his brother meant. The fabric did feel nice. It was comfortable, but it wasn't unsurprising. UA is anything but cheap when it comes to their uniforms. All of their clothing was comfortable. The school even went as far as to make sensory-friendly clothing for those with sensory issues. Kaminari stayed when Hitoshi was taking off his pants and sure enough, there was the sound of electricity buzzing before Kaminari let out a surprise yelp of pain. Izuku was already in his gym pants by the time he spun around. Kaminari's nose was lightly bleeding, and his hair stuck up a little crazier now. He was giving them a shaky thumbs up. I'm fine. I'm who? It's hot in here, you know. I gotta go. Kaminari then made his grand escape as he ran away. Not before running right into Takoyami. Sorry, Kaminari yelped as he backed up and ran. What is his problem? Hitoshi inquired as he finished putting on his shoes. No clue. Izuku lied while he felt a tiny smile play on his lips. No clue at all. You ready? Yep. Izuku and Hitoshi were the last two out of the changing room, but they weren't too far behind everyone else. Eventually everyone was all lined up and waiting on their instructions. Their teacher stood in front of everyone with his hands in his pockets. Hearing a growl, Izuku looked to see Bakugo glaring enraged daggers at him, like Izuku personally snubbed him or something to that effect. Sorry for breathing, was all Izuku could think as he looked away from Bakugo. Once all 20 students were standing there in front of him, Mr. Aizawa simply pulled out a tennis ball and walked up to Bakugo. Bakugo reached out and took the ball from the teacher. I want you to throw this as hard as you can, using your quirk. There were happy gasps amongst the crowd. Nobody spoke as Bakugo looked at the ball in his hand before his face broke out into a grin. Bakugo strolled a little forward, cocked his arm back, and Izuku watched as Bakugo's hand started to glow a bright orange before. Boom. Die. Bakugo had all but screamed as he sent the tennis ball flying. An explosion leaving the palm of his hand as it looked like his ball was on fire as it streaked across the sky. There was a wave of heat that blasted everyone in the face as an aftershock. Izuku asked in his confusion as he looked at Hitoshi. Sociopath. Hitoshi huffed and put his hands in his pocket. Mr. Aizawa showed them a score. Izuku blinked in surprise. 700 meters. The same amount Izuku managed to do the day before when he broke 2 fingers on his right hand. Some other students gasped out in surprise. It's good, but it can be better. You all haven't been able to test your quirks to their limits because they don't want middle schoolers using their quirks. Well, that ends today. I will be scoring you all on your 50-meter dash, strength grip, pole vault, sit-ups, and as you all just saw, the pitch. Mr. Aizawa said. You mean, from now on we can finally use our quirks? Kirishima had gasped happily. Awesome. Kaminari clapped his hands in his excitement. Mr. Aizawa suddenly got a dark look over his face as the students continued to cheer happily. Only Izuku and Hitoshi stayed quiet. They knew their father. Mr. Aizawa was planning something and it made Izuku reach over and hold Hitoshi's hand. Hitoshi clasped his fingers around Izuku's and they waited for the shoe to drop. So, you think it'll be all fun and games now, do you? Mr. Aizawa growled as he shoved his hands into his pockets and glowered at the students. Well, if you think you're here to have a good time then you can leave. You are here to be heroes and I will train you as such. This isn't a fun retreat. Let's up the stakes. The person who scores the lowest in this class will be expelled. Oh, the silence was heavy. Why you can't do that? Can you? The Frenchman, Aoyama, asked in a scared whisper as he stared ahead with wide eyes. He can and he very much will. Izuku thought as he stared ahead 1,000,000 miles away. He and Hitoshi looked at each other once more. He then looked back at his father. For a moment he caught his dad's eye. Izuku was never one to back down from a challenge, especially not ones his father gave him and Hitoshi. And Aizawa has given them a lot of challenges throughout the years. Aizawa narrowed his eyes at Izuku. Izuku responded by nodding. Challenge accepted, old man. I'll beat your test. Hitoshi and I both. The 50-meter dash was first. Everyone had to go into groups of 4 and wait their turns. All of these kids had some impressive quirks. Izuku had to say he felt honored to be by their side as he watched them use their quirks to their advantage. Bakugo surprised him when he used his quirk to fly across the finish line. Izuku was itching for his pen and journal. Hitoshi had an advantage when it came to the meter. His legs. So, between the two of them, he won the dash. Izuku wasn't dead last. Second to last wasn't too bad. Izuku did better than Hitoshi on the grip strength. But he didn't stand a chance compared to Shoji, Kirishima, and Sato. Unfortunately, Hitoshi came in last on that one. He gave it his all despite knowing he wouldn't do too good. Izuku quietly patted his shoulder. You did your best. It doesn't feel fair. Hitoshi grumbled a little in a whisper as they walked away. I know, but think about it. It's not just us right now. Kaminari and Hagakure don't have quirks that can help them out during this test either. Izuku whispered. We're all on our own basically. We just have to try our very best. And pray. Yeah, you're right. At least a pole vault should be a breeze, right? With our acrobatic experience. You bet. Hitoshi loved showing off. That's one of the first things Izuku learned about Hitoshi. So, whenever an opportunity arose that allowed Hitoshi to show himself off, he never missed it. Hitoshi was smiling as he stared down the pole vault. The vault itself wasn't big. Not like the one used in the Olympics anyways. It was smaller, so basically anyone could vault over it as long as they knew what to do. Hitoshi held the stick close to his chest before he charged. He ran fast, his training kicking in before he struck the pole into the ground and lifted himself off the ground. Izuku couldn't hide his smile as Hitoshi flew up and looked absolutely weightless as he spun in the air, once, twice, 3 times before he landed. Clearly his gymnastics took over, but he still got pretty far. Hell, a couple of students clapped for him when he landed almost perfectly. Gymnastics really took over when he held his arms out as he landed. PSH. Bakugo huffed in irritation. Izuku felt a bit of agitation rise up in his chest. You did great, Hichin. Izuku immediately called out. Honestly, he did it just to piss Bakugo off, and it worked as Bakugo's eyebrows furrowed almost comically as a large vein looked ready to pop on his forehead. Izuku smugly grinned at Bakugo. Something wrong? No, because you'll be out of this class soon enough. Bakugo snarled as he bit on his tongue to keep himself from yelling most likely. Ha, that's what you think. Izuku narrowed his own eyes at Bakugo. I want to beat him at something. Just to wipe that stupid look off of his stupid smug face. Hitoshi walked up and tossed the pole at Izuku. Your turn. Izuku was a little less confident in his abilities to pole jump. Hitoshi was great at acrobatics and gymnastics alike. Izuku was good, but he didn't feel he was as good as his twin. Clearly this must have been shown on his face because Hitoshi bumped his hip into Izuku. Don't forget, you have something of an advantage in this one. Not just with your knowledge of acrobatics either. I have an advantage. Izuku thought as he looked at the pole in his hands. Not just with acrobatics ... What could he mean by that? Oh, the idea struck him and Izuku spun to his brother. Izuku then hugged Hitoshi tightly. You're a genius. He couldn't hide his grin. Now fully pumped and excited, Izuku practically ran to the starting point. Hey, what does that mean, Toshi? Kaminari had been the one to ask. What does it matter? Deku will be the first one out of here and I'm sure you'll be directly behind him. I begs. Bakugo interrupted before Hitoshi could speak. He's queer. Izuku didn't hear what was said next as his blood was pumping directly in his ears, drowning everyone out. A plan was forming in his head and he knew he had to time it right. Then he charged. He ran as fast as he possibly could. Izuku ran past his father, and Izuku couldn't help it. He smiled brightly at his dad before he used the pole to catapult himself up into the air. Like with Hitoshi, Izuku did show off, just a little as he did a flip. The flip was needed so he was back facing the pole. The world felt like it was moving in slow motion as he watched the pole lifelessly start to fall towards the ground. Izuku reached his hand out for the pole. It stilled for a moment before it came flying towards him. This was the tricky part. Izuku had to be facing the pole as the end came flying towards him like a rocket. Izuku held his breath as he continued to slowly fall. He reached both of his arms up and above his head, causing the pole to follow his movements. Closer and closer it was coming until, I got it, wah. Izuku caught it between both of his hands, but the trajectory and the velocity of the pole caused him to go flying back so suddenly that he flipped backwards. Gah! Izuku cried out in pain as he slammed the pole back into the ground so suddenly that it caused the wooden stick to jam into his stomach. He only used this to his advantage and pushed himself off of the pole, using this new momentum to make him go even farther than he would have normally. The next thing he knew, he was staring at the sky before his father was suddenly in his vision. Are you okay? Yeah, heh, that was wild. Izuku grinned. I never thought of trying that. He threw his hands up in triumph. Way to go. Ochako clapped. Rather smart, if not reckless. Ada gave a little laugh as he clapped as well. His dad didn't want to show it. Not with the other children watching, but Izuku could see it. A teeny tiny little smile. Let's try and keep the injuries to a minimum. He offered his hand out and Izuku took it. He got his wish in the end with his little move. He did a longer and farther jump than Bakugo. However, the cost was the perfectly round bruise embedded into his stomach. However, when he finally got up to his feet, he noticed something interesting. Bakugo's face. He was shocked. Is this guy such an egomaniac that he doesn't think he can be beaten at something? Izuku thought as he gave Bakugo the side eye before Izuku returned to Hitoshi. Zuku, I knew you had a quirk. Kaminari came up from behind and wrapped his arms around Izuku's shoulders in a hug. I knew that pen floated up into your hand. You've been holding out on me, man. The pen. Izuku blinked at Kaminari's words. That's right. A while back Kaminari mentioned how a pen floated into my hand. I hadn't realized it, but then it proves it. This object attraction quirk. It's mine. Izuku looked at his hands. But what caused it to surface? Why hadn't I realized it before? Izuku wanted to think more about it, but he couldn't, not while the assessment test was still in full swing. After the pole vault test came the sit-up test. Ochako offered to spot him, while Kaminari spotted Hitoshi. Izuku didn't come in last. No, Hitoshi did, with Izuku second to last. They both felt rather awful. Izuku felt his father's eyes bore into them. Is he ashamed? Should we be at the top of the list? Izuku had thought as he looked away from his dad. As usual, his father was just emotionless, not letting any emotion show on his face anywhere. Eventually came time for the final test. The pitch. Because Katsuki had demonstrated, he didn't have to go again. So, one by one students threw their balls to the best of their abilities. Izuku watched, amazed, as Ochako's ball slowly floated up, 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 up. Infinity. Everyone had yelled as Aizawa showed them her score. Ochako happily skipped back so she was beside Izuku. Well, we know who's gonna win this one. Izuku smiled back at Ochako. He went up next. Izuku was tempted to use one for all in an attempt to bring his score up. But he knew. Oh, how Izuku knew if he would to use that quirk without his dad's permission, he'd be running the yard until he collapsed. So, Izuku simply levitated the ball to him and threw it as far as possible. He was dead last with a measly 60-meter throw. Hitoshi was next. He grabbed the ball out of Aizawa's hand, but he didn't get to step up to the plate as Bakugo suddenly opened his mouth. Make your last pitch, quirkless loser. You're clearly gonna go. Next to you, that is. Bakugo turned to Izuku. Hitoshi stopped and glared at Bakugo from over his shoulder. Excuse me. Izuku spat quickly in Bakugo's direction. 1. Hitchin has a quirk. 2. We're not going anywhere. If he has a quirk, then why hasn't he used it? At least you used your quirk, as lame as it is. My quirk isn't combat-based. Hitoshi spoke next. But I will be more than happy to give you a demonstration. Hitoshi brought his arm down as his teeth gnashed together. God knows I've been dying to show it to you. Heh, give it your best shot. Bakugo's eyes went vacant. His red irises turned milky in color as his jaw went slack. Good, since you like to run that mouth of yours so much, why don't you come here and take this ball for me? Hitoshi demanded as he held the ball out. Bakugo slowly trudged over and obediently took the ball from Hitoshi. Throw it like you had earlier, with the explosion. Hitoshi put his hands on his hips as he backed away from Bakugo. Like from earlier, Bakugo's right hand started to glow a striking orange color before he swung his arm out violently. Boom. Like before, there was a wave of heat that hit them all directly in the face as there was a wide arch of fire before the ball went flying off in the distance and vanished. There was a silence as their classmates just stared in shock and awe at what just happened. I can brainwash people. That's my quirk. Judge me if you want. But I was born with this quirk and I plan on using it to become a hero. Before Hitoshi could cut the connection between him and Bakugo, Aizawa showed the class's score. The exact same score as Bakugo's. But, sensei, Hitoshi didn't even throw the ball himself. He used Bakugo to do it. A blonde boy, Ajiro, had quickly spoken up. You're right. That being said, he used his quirk to his advantage. How is this any different than Izuku bringing the pole back to him so he can jump longer? Or Ada using his boosters to run farther in the 50-meter dash? Don't forget, I'm assessing your quirks. Aizawa lowered the score counter so it was facing the ground now. But his quirk is Dan Hagakure had started to say, and Izuku cut her off before she could finish her sentence. It's not dangerous. The only thing that makes a quirk dangerous is the holder. Izuku quickly spoke up on his brother's behalf. Look at Achako for example. She could easily send any one of you to space, but she won't. What makes Hitchin any different? A few people broke out in mutters while others nodded along, agreeing with what Izuku had just said. Hitoshi started to walk away and towards Izuku, but he was stopped by Aizawa. Tora H, are you going to release Bakugo? Oh, right. Silly me, I almost forgot. Hitoshi smiled a little smugly as he said this. It was almost too quiet. He then blinked and Bakugo was released. He stood there, confused as he frantically looked around. What the fuck, who the fuck? What did you do to me, eyebags? Bakugo, once again, charged directly for Hitoshi. Bakugo used his explosions to fly his way towards Hitoshi to try and get there quicker than he would normally. Hitoshi seemed to bristle and he brought his hands up, ready to throw down with Bakugo. Bring it. I'll beat your ass, you Pomeranian fuck. It never got that far. Aizawa's scarf wrapped around not only Bakugo, but Hitoshi as well. Bakugo was stopped dead in his tracks and found, fairly quickly, that he couldn't fight against Aizawa's capture weapon. Aizawa had personally wrapped his scarf around Hitoshi's mouth. Hitoshi didn't even try to fight it. He just sighed and allowed his arms to fall to the side. Let me make one thing personally clear amongst all of you. I don't tolerate fighting nor bullying. You are future heroes and you are to act like it. Am I clear? The rest of Class 1 mumbled their response of, yes, sir. Good. Aizawa released Hitoshi and Bakugo. Bakugo fell face first to the ground once he was let go. Hitoshi only huffed in slight irritation before returning to Izuku. Bakugo got right back up to his feet and grumbled in anger before storming back to the rest of the class. All right, let's go. Your scores should be up. Aizawa then stalked past the class with his hands in his pockets. The air turned to stress in seconds. Who was going to be expelled? It might be me. Hitoshi whispered solemnly as they walked together. Izuku thought about what Akisho had said back in the bathrooms. If you go, I go. We'll both be together, no matter what. Izuku squeezed Hitoshi's hand. So altogether, Class 1 huddled around a holographic scoreboard. Izuku felt Hitoshi squeeze his hand just a little tighter. Zuchin, I'm last. Hitoshi squeaked, the fear evident in his voice. Izuku felt his throat tighten as he reached over with his other hand to pat Hitoshi's hand. Izuku wasn't much better really as he was second to last. I stand by what I said, Hitchin. If you go, I go. He couldn't believe his time in the hero course was so short. A couple of students gave Hitoshi pitying looks, and Izuku feels anger boil in his blood. What the hell were you thinking, Dad? Were you just long conning Hitchin and me this whole time? Izuku could only think in frustration. As if to answer his thoughts, Aizawa spoke. The results are clear as day. The student being expelled is. Hitoshi swallowed hard and Izuku put his head on his brother's shoulder. It was so short-lived. Hitoshi whispered in anger. No one. Aizawa smiled that damned smile that he's given Izuku and Hitoshi many times. That flat smile showing off his teeth. It was a logical ruse at M. Are you kidding? Izuku had suddenly screamed out in defiance and he wasn't the only one as other students also screamed their frustration. I am not. I wanted you all to try your best on this and what better motivation than the fear of being expelled? Mr. Aizawa had said with that same smile still plastered on his face. Am I the only one who knew that? A girl with thick dark black hair put up into a ponytail had asked with a slight scoff. Izuku couldn't really pay too much attention to her as Hitoshi had simply leaned in and hugged him. Holy shit, out of all the things. Hitoshi had whispered to him. God, scared the crap out of me. I know what you're saying, oh, Izuku gasped when his shoulder was bumped. He looked up to see Bakugo. This isn't over, Deku. Bakugo hissed at him before stalking away. Who walks like that casually? Izuku thought as he watched Bakugo walk, squat, knees bent, with his shoulders back. It almost made Izuku laugh, but he managed to keep his composure. Aizawa's smile fell from his face and he went back to being emotionless. Alright, go get changed. The bell's gonna ring soon and I'm not writing you guys late passes. They had present mic for an English teacher, and Midnight was their math teacher. But seeing how it's the first day of school, most of their other classes just handed out the syllabus and instructed how they wanted the class to act for the school year. Lunch came, and Izuku was ready to go to the roof with Hitchin, as they would usually. Izuku kind of figured that any friendship potential was destroyed when they learned about how Hitoshi's quirk worked. But surprisingly, Deku, come eat with me and Ida. Ochako suddenly jumped into Izuku's field of vision. You too, Hitchin. Hitoshi immediately tensed. I'm sorry, Deku. Izuku blinked innocently at Ochako. Oh, is that not your name? I just figured because that one boy calls you that all the time. It's an insult. Hitoshi chimed in. He's calling Izuku useless. I don't even know why. We don't know the guy. Hitoshi growled. Also, it's Hitoshi. Only Izuku can call me Hitchin. No offense or anything. He then turned away from Ochako. Oh, I'm sorry. Ochako frowned. She turned slightly forlorn and Izuku immediately jumped in. A common mistake. And please don't let Hitchin get to you. He's always blunt with people. You can call me Zuku. Kaminari came up and placed his chin on the top of Izuku's head. He let his whole body go limp, placing a lot of weight on Izuku. I'm too tired to go to the rooftop. Zuku, I like that. It has such a nice ring to it. Ochako smiled and Izuku immediately blushed a bright red. Zuku it is. He agreed. You three should eat with Ida and I. Come on, it's gotta be better than eating on the rooftop. Ochako suddenly said with a smile. And for the first time since elementary school, Hitoshi and Izuku actually ate in the cafeteria with other people. It was almost insane to think about. Tora, I wanted to ask, how's your stomach? That pull had to hurt. Ida had inquired as he started to eat his lunch. Izuku had just opened his bento and grabbed a rice ball. Quietly, he dunked it into his little Tupperware of soy sauce before he answered. Sore, really sore actually. I didn't think my plan would actually work. Izuku laughed before taking a bite out of his rice ball. His mouth was slightly full when he spoke, and so he put his hand in front of his mouth so as not to seem rude. I should really be thanking Hitchin. I hadn't even considered using my object attraction quirk to my advantage. Oh, that reminds me. Kaminari swiftly turned to Hitoshi. Toshi, that spin you did when you vaulted over the bar was insane. You didn't tell me you were a gymnast. Hitoshi blushed a very light pink and swallowed down his mouth full of food. Zuchin and I do acrobatics on the weekends. Gymnastics is one of them. Oh, that's so smart. Ochako suddenly chirped happily. You two must be really flexible. Acrobatics, I never thought of that. Ida commented as he looked at his own arms. Heaven knows I could be a little more flexible. If gymnastics is one, what other one do you two do? Kaminari inquired. I can answer that. We also do silk acrobatics as well as trapeze, however, those are only on the occasion. Wow, Ochako looked absolutely impressed. Can we see you two trapeze act? That would be so cool. She's right. That would be amazing, Toshi. Watching you and Izuku swinging around in the air. Izuku blushed this time around as he took another bite of his rice ball. I don't know about that. We're not as good at trapeze as we are at gymnastics. He's right. We're still constantly letting go of one another. I don't think you'd like to see us just falling into a safety net the whole time. Hitoshi also took a bite of his food as he spoke. He wasn't as polite as Izuku as he spoke without covering his mouth. Izuku felt eyes on him. He turned his head over his shoulder to see Bakugo. The sociopath was just glowering at Izuku. Bakugo was eating his food slowly and deliberately while he glared at Izuku the whole time. It was, in all honesty, a little off-putting. Son of a bitch. What is this guy's problem? Hitoshi slammed his fist down in irritation. You guys say he doesn't know you. Then how'd he know Zuko was quirkless before? Kaminari suddenly asked and Izuku turned to him in surprise. What? When did this happen? Izuku asked and Kaminari looked a little confused before turning to Hitoshi. You didn't tell him. It was during the pole vault. As you were jumping, Bakugo said. And I quote, Deku will be the first one out of here and I'm sure you'll be directly behind him, Ibex. He's quirkless. Kaminari did a pretty funny job of mocking Bakugo's rough and gruff voice. Oh yeah. Ochako snapped her fingers. And Hitoshi said, you can't possibly know that, you angry mutt. Ochako's impression of Hitoshi wasn't spot on, but she did use her chopsticks to mimic Hitoshi's eyebrows at the time and made them into an angry V-shape over her own eyes. And it made her burst into a fit of giggles, which made Izuku laugh a little as well. Yep, and then Izuku brought the pole to him and you should have seen Bakugo's face. He looked so stunned. It shut him up, for once today. Izuku looked at Hitoshi before standing up. Okay, that's it, Izuku suddenly said as he grabbed his bento box. I'm going to talk to him. Well, there's no need. Hitoshi spoke up next but was cut off by Izuku. He clearly knows something, Hitchin. I don't think he's just being a bully to be a bully. I'm going to talk to him. Hitoshi went to stand, but Izuku stopped him. By myself. Izuku put his hand up to stop his brother. Hitoshi pursed his lips to the side before sitting back down. Very well, I'll be back, he whispered. Izuku turned towards Bakugo. The moment they made eye contact with each other, Bakugo's eyes turned white in color and turned comically angry while he gnashed his teeth. Don't you dare, Bakugo started to yell, but it fell on deaf ears as Izuku put his food down at the seat across from Bakugo. There was a beat of silence as Bakugo looked from the bento then back to Izuku, who sat down. Are you hard of hearing, Deku? Bakugo all but roared. He roared so loudly that the cafeteria immediately quieted down as people stared in their direction. No, but are you? Izuku honestly asked as he grabbed his half-eaten rice bowl. Do you want to die? I'm being serious. Are you hard of hearing? It seems like it with how much you yell and scream. Those explosions of yours might be making you hard of hearing. I'll kill you. Izuku heard a chair scrape from behind him and he raised his hand up. As signal, Hitoshi stopped before he rose from his chair. We're fine. Hitoshi grumbled and must have sat right back down. Izuku then focused back at Bakugo. Rice bowl. He offered one of his 2 remaining rice balls to Bakugo. Bakugo stuttered for a moment before his eyes returned to normal. Keep your shitty food. Bakugo waved Izuku off with an angry huff. Izuku shrugged and continued to eat. So, you know I have to ask. Do I know you? Or, do you know me? It seems like you know me, but I don't know you. Izuku asked after he swallowed his food down. TCH. Bakugo huffed again as he looked down at his own food. I don't know. Bakugo admitted. You fucking look like someone I knew once, okay. But, you can't possibly be him. Bakugo stabbed his food with his chopsticks. Why can't I be him? He's quirkless, for starters, and he's dead. Oh, I'm sorry. Izuku frowned at the news given to him. Don't you fucking pity me. I'm not. Izuku put his hands up in front of him. I swear. I assume his name was Deku. Izuku thought for a moment before he grimaced. Who names their kid Deku? TCH. There was that noise again. Idiot. Here's the thing. You look identical to him. Curly green hair, freckles, the works. You even share his name. Izuku. But, like I said, he was quirkless. Bakugo growled. It's like my mom says, if it look like a duck, quacks like a duck, and walks like a duck, it's a fucking duck. He slammed his fist down in anger and his chopsticks rattled from the impact. You say, he's dead. Izuku felt a buzzing in the back of his skull. It felt like fuzz was slowly starting to fill his brain. It itched and tickled a little. Something was wrong. I look at you, I can't say. I really can't. You look like you could be his twin. But, Hitchin is my twin. Izuku mumbled softly as his brain continued to feel fuzzy and there was a soft ringing in his ears. Bakugo snorted. Yeah, whatever, and All Might is my uncle. He rolled his eyes. He then looked at Izuku. Are you sure you don't remember me? I don't look familiar to you in the slightest? Bakugo inquired and for a solid second the two of them just stared at each other. He did look familiar. That's the thing. Izuku was certain he knew Bakugo from somewhere. He looked so familiar and the longer Izuku looked the more intense the static and ringing became. Then the fuzziness, the static feeling, and the ringing stopped. I'm missing the first 5 years of my memories, Izuku said almost as if he was on autopilot. His voice was monotone and he wondered if he was under Hitoshi's control with how emotionless he had become. What the fuck did you just say to me? Bakugo's voice turned tense as Izuku started to rise up to his feet. I probably shouldn't have I'm sorry Izuku's mind was suddenly flooded with panic after being so void of emotion just moments before. His mind was telling him to run and far away from Bakugo Katsuki. I can't pronounce your name, so from now on you'll be Kachin Hitchin. And you're gonna be my bestest friend ever. Izuku's hand automatically slapped over his mouth to stop himself from yelling out as the memory physically hurt his head. Sweat poured down the back of his neck and he felt his whole body tense up. Bakugo sat up almost immediately at this wild movement. I have to go. Izuku then bolted, not just from Bakugo, but out of the cafeteria entirely. Zachin. Izuku heard the sound of a clattering chair, before the sound of footsteps immediately chasing after him. Izuku had made it out of the cafeteria and down the hallway before Hitoshi caught up with him. It didn't take much with Hitoshi's long legs to his advantage. Hitoshi had grabbed Izuku by the shoulder first before he managed to grab Izuku's arm with his other hand. He tugged Izuku, forcing him to a stop and to take a wild step back. This almost made Izuku fall to his butt, but Hitoshi kept a steady grip on his arm. What happened? Hitoshi breathed in and out heavily in surprise. I don't know. Izuku grabbed onto his head and tangled his fingers into his wild curly hair. His chest heaved up and down, be it from the running or an oncoming panic attack. I don't know, Hitchin. Izuku then attached himself to Hitoshi's chest and grabbed onto the back of his brother's jacket. Hey, it's okay. It's okay. I'm here, Hitoshi whispered as he lightly patted Izuku's back. There's a name on the tip of Izuku's tongue. It was right there, like a word someone would know but just didn't know the name of. Just like Bakugo, a person he knew but didn't know at the same time. Katsuki. Bakugo Katsuki. Come on, Zuchin. Little 4-year-old Hitoshi yelled from a distance as he waved Izuku down. Are you scared? Cause you know I'll beat you. Hitoshi had continued to yell. Izuku hesitantly shook his head. Nah. Suddenly 2 different kids appeared behind Hitoshi. They had no faces, just blank slates. Then come on. Izuku hurried so he was right behind Hitoshi. Even as a little 4-year-old, Hitoshi had such long legs and made it hard to keep up with. Not that it mattered. Every time Izuku tried to get too close, the 3 of them would all take off in a run, trying to get away from him. He's quirkless. Don't let him touch me. I don't want to be quirkless. One boy yelled out as he ran. Hey, that's not nice. Hitchin, tell them that's not nice. Izuku whined as he continued to chase after the trio. Usually, Hitoshi would defend his twin. He had more than a few bruises to show for that fact, but he didn't. Not today. You know it's true. You make everybody you touch quirkless, because you're quirkless, a curse. I do not. Stop being mean. Hitoshi's image flickers for a second. No longer purple-haired and purple-eyed, but red-eyed and blonde-haired. His smirk turned into a malicious smile, before he flickered back to normal. Hitchin, I'm gonna tell my mommy. Izuku had scrambled to keep up with the 3 of them. He tripped on more than one occasion. The scene almost seemed to change as they were all now running on a fallen tree right above a flowing crystal blue river. Hitoshi then stopped running and twisted his body around so suddenly that it caused some of the bark beneath his feet to break off. Stupid, quirkless, crybaby Deku wa. Suddenly one of his feet slipped along with a slick piece of moss and down Hitoshi. No, down Bakugo went into the river. Wake up. Izuku's eyes snapped open as a fearful scream left his mouth. Hitoshi was above him. He had Izuku's arms pinned above his head. Hitoshi was breathing heavily, his eyes wide with fear as he looked down at Izuku. Hitoshi's hands trembled as he held on tightly to Izuku's wrists. Are you back with me? Hitoshi whispered fearfully. Izuku licked his dry lips as he took note that his brother was still in his own PJs. So, Izuku looked at his alarm clock by his bed, gifted by his father after he took Izuku's phone. It was only 4 in the morning. What happened? Izuku whispered back to his brother, fear laced in Izuku's voice. You were thrashing in your sleep. Hitoshi finally let go of Izuku's wrist and slowly lowered himself back down to the floor beside Izuku's bed. I was afraid you were going to hurt yourself. Are you okay? That dream was. It felt so real. I think it was. Izuku sat up in his bed and put his hand to his face. A stupid, quirkless, crybaby Deku, he whispered back to himself. Bakugo. Hitoshi growled in anger. Clearly that bully just got under your skin today. Hitoshi huffed before he suddenly crawled into bed with Izuku. Izuku sank back down into his covers and together the 2 of them threw the covers over their heads. I don't think so, Hitchin. I think it's more than that. I actually knew him. Izuku murmured to his brother. Maybe you did, but clearly he wasn't your friend. Izuku opened his mouth ready to dispute, but he thought better of it. He didn't have all the facts. I don't know, he settled on saying. I really don't. All I do know is that it's giving me one hell of a headache. He gave a dry laugh before resting his head on Hitoshi's shoulder. And I feel like I'm going crazy. You're not. He said his friend was dead. That he looked exactly like me. Well, you're not dead last I checked. No, but I am missing. There was a beat of silence before Hitoshi shook his head. No, they had a chance to claim you up. They gave up that right 5 years ago. I think you just have the misfortune of looking like his dead friend and he's taking it out on you. God knows how many times I thought I saw my mom or dad in a crowd. It's too many coincidences. There was another beat of silence between the 2 before Hitoshi hummed. Besides, you have to think about it. It's always been you and I. Who is he to come barging in and claim you to be his deceased friend all of a sudden? Yeah, you're right. It does seem strange. Besides, you give better hugs and cuddles. Izuku shifted so he was now wrapped up into Hitoshi's arms. Damn right. Bakugo is about as cuddly as a damn cactus. Together they stayed like that under the covers until they both fell into a much easier sleep in one another's arms. Until their father came in a few hours later and yanked the covers off them. Don't you 2 think you're getting a little too old to be sleeping in one another's bed? Was the question their father posed once they stirred. Neither boy had an answer. The class was better about getting into their seats before Mr. Aizawa got to the doorway. Of course, there were still a few stragglers that tried, but ultimately failed to get into their seats. Poor Kaminari got the end of Mr. Aizawa's scarf when he was still standing by the time Aizawa crossed the threshold. I'm sorry, Kaminari wheezed, and Mr. Aizawa tightened his capture weapon around Kaminari's torso and stomach. I'm sorry, he wheezed again, his voice sounding breathy and desperate for air. I mean it when I say I want your butts in chairs. Unders, Kaminari wheezed and tried to take a deep breath in, face now turning a nasty shade of red. Understood, sir. Kaminari finally managed to get out of constricted lungs. Good. Aizawa let Kaminari drop to the ground. Kaminari took in several rapid-fire deep breaths as he brought his hand to his neck. That goes for all of you. Am I clear? Yes, sir. Everybody chimed in, some giving Kaminari pitying glances, while others were trying their hardest not to laugh at Kaminari, who shakily got into his seat. Aizawa walked towards his desk and leaned down to pick up his bright yellow sleeping bag. So, today will not be taught by me. By the time Aizawa zipped up his sleeping bag from the inside, their classroom door suddenly burst open. I am standing in the doorway like a normal person, All Might declared as he poked his head through the doorway in such a way that he was basically bowing through the threshold of the doorway. All Might, everyone, even Izuku, cheered as their favorite hero happily jumped so he was in the middle of the classroom. Standing right at the podium, he kept his signature smile on his face the whole time as he spoke. He's wearing his Silver Age costume. It's such a classic. Izuku beamed while he gushed over the outfit All Might was wearing. Yeah, pretty cool. Hitoshi grinned while he started to put his hair up into a ponytail. All right, listen up you lot. Today we will be teaching you Zygotes about the trial of battle with a hero versus villain simulation battle. It's one of the ways we can get your hero foundation going and get you weaklings properly trained. Some people cheered, ready for the excitement of hero training. Izuku was one of those people that happily clapped along with his peers. Now, before we get going to the battlegrounds, there's one important thing that you guys will need. At his words, a panel in the wall opened up revealing numbered cases. Our hero costumes. The whole class shouted in exhilaration. Even Hitoshi shouted while clapping. Quiet down, Aizawa warned as he slithered into their view, or I'll make you all do it in your gym uniforms. He ceased and everyone clammed up immediately. All right, class, one by one take your case that is assigned by your seat number. All Might ordered in a much softer voice. And once you have your gear, go ahead and go down to the locker rooms. We'll meet up at ground beta. All Might ordered, and like instructed, one by one the students got up to collect their suitcase. Izuku felt himself start to vibrate with excitement. I'm before Hitchin, he thought in giddiness. It wasn't because he wanted his outfit first, but he had a surprise for Hitoshi, one he didn't want his brother to see just yet. When it was finally his turn, Izuku shot up from his seat and rushed to grab his case. The moment it was in his hands, he bolted. Whoa, young Tora sure is excited. All Might laughed as Izuku ran. Walk, Aizawa called after him, and Izuku grumbled as he slowed his pace to a speed walk. Once he was out of the classroom and in the hallway, he went back to a run. Zuku, Kaminari laughed. I gotta get changed first. Izuku laughed as he turned to face Kaminari and gave a little skip in his step. He then focused back around and ran his way towards the changing rooms. Are you sure about this? Aizawa had inquired as he looked over Izuku's final drawing of his hero costume. You won't be able to change it until later. Izuku looked over his blueprints and hummed. He double-checked over everything. The only thing I'm not so about is... Izuku brought his fingers to his chin and quietly muttered to himself. Finally, Izuku shook his head violently. Nope, not second-guessing myself. Yes, it's final. Okay, I'm taking it now. Aizawa took the paper. You won't be getting it back. All changes are final until way later. It's fine. I think I can live with it for now. Izuku smiled at his dad. Izuku then kicked his feet happily. I can't wait to show Hitchin. Izuku was 10 steps ahead of his brother, choosing to change in a stall rather than by his locker. At the time it was just him and Bakugo, as the people before them had already finished changing. Nerd, the fuck? Bakugo ordered as Izuku locked the stall door. It's a surprise. To Hitchin, not to you. Izuku corrected quickly as he started to strip. Whatever. Bakugo just huffed as he rolled his eyes. You and eyebags are really that close, huh? He inquired. Well, duh. Izuku couldn't help but laugh at the seemingly silly question. He folded his clothes on the floor and opened his suitcase. It's awesome, he thought as he looked at the main part of his costume. I told you, he's my twin. Yeah, and like I said, All Might is my uncle. Really, what is he to you? Izuku hummed as he opened his mouth to say, my brother. But he stopped as he was halfway through putting his costume on. His brow furrowed a little as he really thought about it. Hitchin is. He paused again before he beamed, though Bakugo couldn't see it. Can't think of anything nice to say. There was a smugness in Bakugo's voice. No, Izuku continued to smile as he zipped himself into the underlayer of his hero costume. The opposite, really. I have too many good things to say. I guess. Izuku grabbed the second piece of his costume, his gloves, and rolled them onto his person. To sum it up, the best I can say is that Hitchin is my protector and best friend. Next to our dad, he's always looking out for me and he makes sure I'm safe. It's always been the two of us for as long as I could remember. Izuku leaned down and put his shoes on. He's always there when I need him. Always. Whatever. There was the sound of a locker slamming shut as Bakugo grumbled. I don't care anymore, you damn nerd. Oh, okay. Izuku finished putting his costume on and opened the stall door. He knew he had probably seconds to get his clothes in his locker, so he zoomed as fast as he could to his locker, opened it, and just shoved his clothes in. He then slammed his locker shut and ran for the entrance to ground beta. Izuku then put his hood up over his eyes. Instantly his vision turned lavender in color and brought his respirator up to his mouth. Granted, he probably won't need it, But it wasn't just a respirator, as it was also a subtle permanent smile. Hitoshi is going to love this, Izuku thought as he walked up to ground beta where he'd meet with his other classmates. Zuko, is that you in there? Ochako bounded towards him, a bit of glee in her eyes as she did so. I almost didn't recognize you. Thanks, my dad says it's best to try and keep your face hidden if you can. That way villains with a vengeance will have a harder time tracking you down. Izuku was glad he was wearing his respirator and hood now as he knew he was blushing. You look good. This time Ochako blushed. Thanks, it's a little tighter than I expected. She giggled nervously. But it's lightweight, which is perfect for my quirk. She tugged on a part of her black and pink skin-tight suit. Oh, hang on, she then turned and picked something off of the ground. A bright pink helmet. She then put it on her face. The plexiglass was pink, but completely see-through. There, right, you have a zero-gravity quirk. If you'll have me, I'd like to analyze your quirk sometime, boo, but that's if you want. I'm not trying to force you or anything. He instantly panicked, fearful he might have been rude. Ochako laughed again. Sure, anytime. Tora. Ada suddenly came up to the two of them. His face was hidden behind a helmet, but Izuku could tell he was smiling. He wore something akin to a knight costume with his face completely hidden by a knight's helmet, though his costume had engines poking out of his back and boosters by his legs to allow him maximum speed with no risk to his clothes. Why, you look positively purple. Hitoshi choked from behind. Izuku spun and, in his own shock, pointed at his twin. Gee, green. Well, it turns out they both had the same idea. Izuku's surprise. His entire costume was dark purple in color. This was minus his boots, gloves, and knee pads. They were all black. He wanted to keep his red boots, but those would clash with his purple scheme. For his hood he kept eye holes protected by lighter, lavender-colored, shatterproof glass. He kept the rabbit ears for his original design, a subtle nod to All Might with how they stuck up. Yes, originally Izuku wanted capture weapon-esque sleeves. However, his father pointed out that it was impractical, so he scrapped them for now. In fact, Izuku was sure he wasn't going the capture weapon route like his father and brother. Now, Hitoshi's outfit was interesting. Unlike Izuku, he had a capture scarf wrapped snugly around his neck. The scarf was much like their own father's in color, a dark gray. However, unlike their father, Hitoshi's outfit was a dark forest green. He wore a jumpsuit with a red belt around his middle. He also wore black combat boots that were laced up to his knees. Hitoshi had a metal device that was currently hanging down by his neck, his pride and joy that he and Dad had been working on perfecting. The voice modifier. It was perfect for Hitoshi's quirk and most certainly going to give him the advantage. Heh, great minds really think alike. Hitoshi commented as he approached with his hands in his pockets. Purple looks good on you, Zuchin, and green looks good on you. Izuku couldn't help but laugh as he lowered his respirator so it hung around his neck. God, you two are insufferable. Bakugo all but groaned out in annoyance. And jealousy looks good on you. Hitoshi didn't even miss a beat. What's the matter? Don't get enough love at home, you chihuahua. Bakugo's eyes went angry again, white and comically slanted downwards to showcase his rage. Watch yourself, mindfuck. He growled between clenched teeth. Zuko, Toshi, what do you think? Awesome, right? Kaminari saved them from any more interaction with Bakugo as he caught both of their attention. Kaminari wore a simplistic outfit. He wore a white shirt under a black jacket that had lightning bolts down the sides and around the collar. His pants were very much like their gym uniform pants, black to match the jacket with long white lines down the center of each leg. Oh, not bad. Special fabric? Izuku asked as he lightly felt one of Kaminari's sleeves with his fingers. Of course, it's made so it won't burn when I use my quirk. Kaminari grinned. Smart. Hitoshi leaned down and lightly pulled up on Kaminari's right pant leg, just enough to show an ankle. Kaminari blushed a little at this sudden notion. What about those socks of yours? Hitoshi then inquired next as he pointed down at the socks in question. Considering the socks had little sushi rolls imprinted on them, Izuku had a feeling that they were not made to resist high-voltage shocks. Kaminari's face lightly fell once he realized he had made a mistake. I'd get that fixed next time. Simple fix for now, just take your socks off. But I'll get blisters and my feet will sweat. Kaminari whined. I'd rather get blistered than singed by a sock. Izuku chimed in next. Kaminari grumbled a little but immediately sat down to take his shoes off. Be friends with the smart people, they said. It'll be fun, they said. Izuku and Hitoshi both laughed a little as Kaminari started to take his socks off. Eyes on me, came All Might's booming voice, and next thing everyone knew their teacher dove into their view. A powerful gust of wind following his grand entrance. Look at you, zygotes. So young and yet so powerful looking. It's a beautiful thing to see. His eyes landed on Izuku and he simply gave his head a shake. What was All Might thinking about? Still, Izuku smiled as he looked around at everyone. His eyes landed on Todoroki and his smile slipped a little. Todoroki's costume was interesting to say the least, with his entire costume color being a silvery white color and his left side covered in fake ice in an attempt to keep the white color going. Is he hiding his left side? Why? Izuku wondered if it had to do with the scar on the same side of his face. Was Todoroki ashamed of it? Wanted to keep it hidden from the rest of the world? Or did it go even deeper than that? Hitoshi lightly bumped into Izuku. Pay attention, he hissed to his brother. Sorry, Izuku whispered as he focused right back around to All Might. Now, for this trial, this will be an indoor type of simulation. A lot of villainy is often committed indoors, despite what the news outlets will tell you. So, it would only make sense for us to train you how to fight indoors. You must be mindful of your space and potential debris for the outside. Now, the rules. There will be 2 teams. One team will be heroes and the other team will be villains. The villains will be guarding a nuclear weapon, whereas the heroes will be trying to capture the weapon or capture the villains. Each team will have 15 minutes to think of a plan, and then the heroes will have 15 minutes to try and take the nuke from the villains. If they manage to do that, they'll win. However, if the villain team manages to keep their weapon, or they manage to capture both heroes, they'll win. Does everybody understand? Yes, Sensei. Everyone yelled in understanding. Good. Now there will be 2 people per team and each team will be randomly selected. While each simulation is carried out, the rest of us will be watching the battle through security cameras planted around the building. All Might explained, and he turned towards a screen. So, let's not waste any time. Who are our first team of heroes? All Might yelled at the screen. Images flickered in rapid fire in front of them as the first 2 people were chosen at random. Oh, Izuku didn't expect to be up so soon. He was paired with Todoroki. Interesting, Todoroki muttered as he stood next to Izuku. Just try and keep up with me. I will. Izuku smiled as he stood next to Todoroki and stood by his side. Who are we up against? We'll send them packing, Izuku demanded with renewed determination as he pointed at the screen. Todoroki simply snorted in response to Izuku. Once again, rapid-fire images of other students flashed on screen. Oh, Izuku gulped while his eyes went wide. Lady Luck had a sense of humor. Oh, All Might seemed to share the exact same nervousness Izuku had. There was a cackling laugh in the back. It was Kaminari. Oh hell no, I am not working with that sociopath, Hitoshi declared as he pointed at Bakugo. Oh please, you're just upset you're not with your twin. Bakugo made sure to make air quotes around the word twin as he growled at Hitoshi. Besides, the feeling is likewise. You'll just slow me down. I am not, I just don't like you. Hitoshi crossed his arms over his chest. I'll take anybody else in this class. This is a great learning moment. All Might suddenly declared to try and fail to break the tension between both parties. Heroes are often paired together, and more times than not, heroes are paired with other heroes that they may not like. Differences need to be put aside for the sake of a mission. All Might suddenly wedged himself between Bakugo and Hitoshi. He put one arm around Hitoshi and one arm around Bakugo. Besides, who knows, you two may even get along during this simulation. All Might continued to smile while he pulled the 2 of them into a sideways hug. Not that simple. Once Hitchin doesn't like someone, it's almost impossible for him to warm up to that person again, Izuku thought. Akisho is a good example. The day I like him is the day my brain stops working. Hitoshi hissed between clenched teeth as All Might continued to give the 2 of them a squeeze. Likewise, I begs, let's just get this stupid simulation over with. Bakugo hissed right back, matching Hitoshi's energy with his own. Agreed. Hitoshi crossed his arms over his chest in anger and looked away from Bakugo. Good. See, you guys are already agreeing on something. Why don't you forget to ground Beta and get situated? All Might was practically begging with his voice as he pushed Hitoshi and Bakugo forward and then gestured for Izuku and Todoroki to do so. Izuku smiled and allowed Todoroki to take the lead. Todoroki huffed and walked and Izuku followed him. Oh man, this first battle is probably going to end in someone's death. Kaminari continued to cackle as Izuku walked past him. My vote is Bakugo is going to die. You're wrong, Hitoshi is totally dead. Someone, Mina, Izuku thinks, said next with her own laugh. No, you're both wrong. Those 2 are going to kill each other. A male had joined in, Siro, with mirth laced in his voice. Izuku and Todoroki went into the gym before Izuku could hear any more between the students. This is going to be interesting. Izuku was trying not to let his nervousness show as their 15 minutes of planning were almost up. They had come up with a decent plan after Izuku had told Todoroki about Hitoshi's quirk and how it worked. A plan Izuku hoped would work. If not, that's fine. Izuku always had a backup plan. I've been meaning to ask you, Todoroki said as Izuku was stimming his fingers on his right hand. He connected each finger to his thumb in a quick session. Izuku hummed as he turned to face Todoroki. Never once did he stop his stimming. Why do you call your brother Hitchin? Why not just call him Hitoshi? Hitchin? Well, I've always called him that as far back as I remember. Something about his name being too hard to pronounce, I think. Besides, he calls me Zuchin, so it's fair game. but aren't you concerned about how it looks in public? It's rather, childish. Izuku blinked and stopped his stimming as he thought about what Todoroki said. I really don't think about what other people think about me and Hitchin. In the end, their opinions often don't matter, especially to strangers. Todoroki hummed. Very well, then let me pose another question. Don't you think your relationship with your brother is a little too close? Not at all. Izuku twirled a curl around his finger. Is that what you think? You guys are always touching. And most of the time you don't even know it from what I've gathered. Yesterday, for example, during math you reached your left hand back to place it on his desk and he took it. If it's not hand-holding, it's hugging. 5. Todoroki looked confused for a very serious moment. Are sibling relationships supposed to be all touchy-feely? Oh, he has siblings. Well, no, I don't think so anyways. I think the best way to describe it with me and Hitchin is that our love language is touch. Izuku smiled and Todoroki kept his frown on his face. Love language. Todoroki then tilted his head cutely. Before Izuku could answer, a buzzer sounded throughout the building. Let the simulation begin. All Might's voice boomed throughout the whole gym. I'll explain later. Come on. Izuku grabbed onto Todoroki's non-ice-covered hand and together they marched into the building. I wonder what plan Hitchin had cooked up with Bakugo. You're a fucking idiot and you're the reason we're going to fail. But fine. Fuck you. You want to run off and beat them on your own because you're so much better than me and my quirk. Go. Enjoy getting your ass kicked and losing. Hitoshi threw his hands out as he yelled out to Bakugo's retreating form. Egomaniac sociopath. He couldn't even get a word in edgewise on the plan. The plan? Let Bakugo handle it and stay out of his fucking way. Fine. Hitoshi was fine being on guard duty as he stood in front of the weapon. Of course, he was going to try his all to defend it from Todoroki and Izuku, but his brother knew his quirk and how it worked and no doubt already told Todoroki. You just hate me, don't you? Hitoshi looked at the ceiling at any invisible deity he could think of. He then shrugged at the ceiling. It had to be Zuchin, the only person in the class that knows how my quirk works fully. He then waved his arms once again as he stood there. Hitoshi suddenly felt a chill down his spine and he breathed out a little shaky breath. When he breathed out, he instantly noticed something alarming. He could see his breath. Then came the noise, the loud crinkling of ice breaking and forming, and it was getting louder and louder as time passed. What exactly was Todoroki's quirk again? Before Hitoshi could properly react, a wall of freezing cold ice slammed and wrapped around his ankles, holding him in place. Oh, it's like that. Hitoshi hissed as the ice was immediately seeping into his pants legs and burning his skin. He tried to wiggle his ankles free, but no dice. He was stuck in place. Well, this might be over sooner than I thought. I wonder if Mr. I'm better than you is doing any better. Hitoshi then came to a horrific realization as he looked down at his ankles. The cracking noise of ice breaking and forming never stopped. It was slowly and painstakingly crawling up his legs. Bakugo was not doing any better. See cold. He shivered as he walked cautiously along the ice-covered hallway. His one fucking weakness was cold, and of course he had to up against the guy that can make ice. The peppermint-looking bastard coated the whole building in his ice, making it unbelievably cold and slippery. Bakugo tensed at the sound of hurried footsteps. They were coming from down the hallway to his left. As much as he wanted to use his explosions to make himself fly across the hallway, he couldn't. The cold meant he couldn't sweat. No sweat. No explosions. Fucking quirkless Deku. He growled in irritation. He didn't care what Deku said. That was his quirkless Deku. His friend was swallowed by a black hole. Kachin, save me, was the last thing 4-year-old worthless Deku had screamed as he reached desperately for his best friend. But Bakugo couldn't move from his spot as he watched it happen, horrified and slightly amazed as Deku just vanished. That day had haunted Bakugo for the last 9 years, watching as Deku, the worthless quirkless crybaby Deku, got taken just like that. In the snap of a finger he was gone. The black hole killed him, it had to have. It was a villain attack gone bad. At least that's what Bakugo had thought until yesterday. Bakugo huffed out, a steam of air leaving his mouth at this action as he took off running towards the footsteps. I'm missing the first 5 years of my memories. That changes today. You're not going to make a fool out of me. I still think we should have encased them in ice completely. Todoroki had huffed out a puff of air as the two of them ran along the ice-covered hallway. It's less fun that way. It's not about having fun. Todoroki growled at Izuku. Come on, we have to give them a chance. Are you just saying that because your brother is on the other team? Okay, maybe a little, but it's more than that. I want to see look out. Izuku had reacted before Todoroki and he had reached out. Pushing his palm against Todoroki's back, he managed to get Todoroki out of the way right as Bakugo had jumped around the corner. I got you. Bakugo reached for him, but Izuku had responded by striking his palm up and hard against the softer part of Bakugo's cheek. Gak was the noise Bakugo had made. Izuku watched him as at first he was stunned with his head turned to the side. Go. Izuku barked at Todoroki. Leave Bakugo to me. Go get the bomb. Todoroki paused, looking ready to fight it, but instead he skipped back a few steps and ran for the bomb. Then Bakugo snapped his head in Izuku's direction, red eyes bloodshot and filled with unbridled rage. I'm going to kill you, Bakugo had growled between clenched teeth. I believe it. Izuku couldn't help it. He smiled. Bring it. He raised his fists up. His hands were trembling slightly, but he chalked that up to adrenaline. Say my name, Bakugo suddenly demanded, and Izuku blinked in surprise. Bakugo. Bakugo's teeth gnashed together in anger and he swung. Izuku gasped and went to take a step back, but his foot slipped on some ice. It still worked out as he managed to dodge the attack, even though he landed on his butt. Say my name. Bakugo all but roared at Izuku as he went to grab at him again. Izuku, now using the ice to his advantage, pushed himself between Bakugo's legs. Izuku then used his own feet to knock out Bakugo's left leg from under him. Bakugo was down on the ice just as well. Bakugo let out an enraged growl of frustration when he landed. Izuku scrambled, literally, to his feet. His shoes kept slipping against Todoroki's ice, and for a good 2 seconds he was actually just running in place. Bakugo had suddenly grabbed the back of his shirt and pulled Izuku back down to the ground. My name, Bakugo demanded as he was now on top of Izuku. Then there was pain as Bakugo had struck him across the face. Hard. Bakugo had not only used his closed fist, but the edge of his gauntlet had caught Izuku just as well. Say it. Oh, you socio. Stop calling me that. There was another explosion of pain as Bakugo hit him again across the face. Izuku felt something crack. Then stop acting like one. Izuku reached up and grabbed Bakugo's gauntlet to stop him from hitting him again. Izuku then, once again, used the ice to his own advantage and pushed himself out from under Bakugo. Say my name. Bakugo. Damn it. That's not it. Bakugo tried to use his left hand, but Izuku, now out far enough from under Bakugo, kicked him directly in the face before he could strike Izuku again. Only Izuku didn't stop there. Once properly stunned, Izuku wrapped both of his legs around Bakugo's shoulders and twisted his whole body up. Immediately their positions were switched with Izuku directly on top of Bakugo. Then I don't understand what you want from me, Izuku said with a worried tone. 2 fat blood droplets landed directly on Bakugo's face, and Izuku realized that his nose was most likely injured. Or his lip. You really don't remember. I told you already. Bakugo grinned a sadistic grin. Their small fight had made him sweat despite the cold. Then I guess I'll just have to beat those memories back into you. Bakugo had then reached his hand up and Izuku got an explosion directly to his face. The bright light and loud noise was more than enough to stun him. Bakugo pushed Izuku off of him and Izuku fell to his back. Then he felt pain as Bakugo stomped on his chest. Izuku's breath got caught in his throat and for several long agonizing seconds he couldn't breathe. You need to be better, Izuku. A kick to the face. Pain. Just pain. Izuku could taste blood as his head bounced off of the floor violently. He knew for sure his nose was broken this time around. Look what you made me do, Izuku. Young Bakugo, that's enough. He's down. All Might's voice suddenly boomed through the speakers. Bakugo ignored it as he picked Izuku up by his collar and punched him in the face again. Say my name. Say it. Remember, Izuku, you can. Another punch, this time to the gut. If you can't behave, then I'll just have to take Hitoshi away from you again. Clearly he's a bad influence and needs to be punished as such. Izuku reached up and caught the fist coming his way, a sudden anger filling deep inside of his chest. Through the blood and pain he bared his teeth. No, Izuku suddenly growled as he got back to his feet. He twisted their hand uncomfortably. You're not hurting him. Not again and not ever. One for all surged through his whole being. He felt amazing, renewed almost, and with this new feeling, Izuku punched. It was only when his fist made contact did he realize he was punching a fellow student, not the disembodied voice inside his head. Izuku, surprisingly, felt no pain, but Bakugo did when he was thrown through the nearest wall. Izuku breathed out heavily and looked down at his hand and arm. It wasn't broken. Stumbling a little, Izuku then cautiously poked his head through the hole in the wall he had made. Bakugo was sprawled out on the ground unconscious. Izuku watched him for several long seconds until he saw Bakugo's chest rise. Oh, thank goodness. Izuku breathed out and fell to his knees. Ugh. He groaned in pain as he cradled his sore face. His left eye was already starting to swell shut and he tasted blood. He knew his nose was broken and both of his lips was undoubtedly busted. That voice was replaying in his head, over and over and over again, like a broken record player. If you can't behave, then I'll just have to take Hitoshi away from you again. Clearly he's a bad influence and needs to be punished as such. Hitoshi was freezing. The ice had crawled and crept its way up to his torso. He was shivering and could hardly move. Fuck. He breathed out as his body shook. With both hands he gripped onto the capture scarf. God, was he thankful for it? It was his only warmth. Young Bakugo, that's enough. He's down. All Might's booming voice echoed all around them, and Hitoshi continued to violently shiver in his place. Of course, that crazy son of a bitch is beating somebody right now. It better not be Zuchin, Hitoshi thought as he brought his hands up to his mouth and breathed on his frozen fingertips. Hearing a noise to his right, with some effort on his part, Hitoshi turned his head towards the doorway. There, Todoroki stood. Well, hello there. Hitoshi continued to shudder and shiver. Fancy me meeting you fuck. Here, he gasped out. The ice started to climb higher on his body. Todoroki, the fucker, just started to walk past him, towards the missile. Hey, don't be rude. Hitoshi tried to invite him back. Why trap a guy if not to tell talk? Todoroki was getting closer and closer to the weapon. Once he was actually close enough, Hitoshi pounced. Grabbing his capture weapon with semi-frozen fingers, he swung it out and grabbed Todoroki's arm before he could grab it. Todoroki gasped out and his eyes went wide with alarm. Yo, your parents should teach you better. Hitoshi growled as he tried to tug Todoroki closer to him. Todoroki fought against the capture weapon and tried to yank his hand out of it. But it was never easy to get out of a capture weapon once one was ensnared. Todoroki growled and pulled against the weapon. Todoroki looked ready to speak, but stopped just before he slipped up. He just growled in annoyance. Hey, Waweda, you look fine. Hitoshi suddenly came to a realization. Todoroki didn't look like he had been beaten so badly that All Might needed to step in. Oh, that rat bastard. Todoroki knew exactly what Hitoshi was thinking, and he let his guard down. Your love for your brother is going to be your downfall. Hitoshi, already angry, didn't need any more prompting. He immediately took hold over Todoroki's mind. Gee, get this ice off of me. He stuttered in desperation. He really didn't know how it was going to work. Hitoshi figured that Todoroki would start chipping away with a weapon or something. No, Todoroki touched the ice with his left hand, which was now almost to Hitoshi's scarf, and melted the ice. Hitoshi could only watch, amazed, as the ice sizzled under Todoroki's left hand. Steam evaporated into the air at this action. It was amazing to watch in all honesty. Hitoshi sighed in relief as the ice quickly dissipated away from him. His clothes were soaked, but that was fine. He'd take being sopping wet over being encased in ice again. Thanks. Now, why don't you? Not ever. There was an earth-shattering bang. From below, it made Hitoshi gasp in surprise. He immediately turned his head towards the sound. That didn't sound like Boom Boom Boy's explosion. Did Izuku use one for all? He needs me. Hitoshi immediately went to run, to make sure his brother was okay and in one piece, but he stopped himself. You're a villain, remember. If he's broken, you'll win. He looked up at the clock. They had a minute left. He could just stand here and win. Izuku's energy was draining. He found himself leaning against the wall for support as he tried to go up the stairs. The fight, along with his use of one for all, had taken a lot more out of him than he realized. It might have also been the fault of those memories resurfacing as well. His feet slipped on an icy step and he tumbled, sliding down each and every step painfully to the bottom. Landing on his back, Izuku groaned in pain as he looked at the ceiling. We're going to lose. Todoroki must have spoken to Hitchin. He thought rather sadly, but at the same time he felt happy for Hitoshi. Heroes win. Did I hear that right? So, Todoroki didn't speak to him after all. Good job, Zuchin. Hitoshi's worried voice screamed throughout the building. Zuchin. Oh, Izuku coughed up a small bit of blood, probably from his busted lips that were still bleeding. Over here, cried out as he tried to sit up. Hitoshi appeared up top the staircase and he paused. Izuku heard Hitoshi's breathing shake once he saw his state. He knew he had to look bad. Izuku went to stand. It doesn't hurt. That he swayed on his feet. Hitoshi jumped down the rest of the stairs. He nearly slid, but he didn't seem to care about that as he grabbed Izuku. Holy shit. Hitoshi breathed out, feeling eyes on him. Izuku looked up to the top of the steps to see Todoroki. There was something in his eyes. Contempt. Disgust. Izuku really didn't care. You, came Hitoshi's snarl. Izuku turned to look over his shoulder. Bakugo was awake and rubbing his, undoubtedly, sore stomach where Izuku had struck him. Bakugo's eyes landed on Hitoshi and he bared his teeth in anger. Hitchin, let it go. It's part of the simulation. Please, Izuku whispered as he grabbed onto Hitoshi's sleeve. He didn't want Hitoshi to get in trouble for fighting again. Fighting is part of the simulation. Beating a fellow student and classmate is not. Hitoshi went to take a step forward, shoulders squared and teeth grinding. He was ready for a showdown. I'll beat your ass just as well. Bakugo suddenly bristled in his own anger. I'd like to see you try. That was when Todoroki stepped in. Literally, he stomped on the ground and a flood of ice immediately encased all of their ankles, keeping them in place. Enough. It's over. Move on. Todoroki hissed as he came down. He then, surprisingly, took Izuku's arm. You love your brother, we get it. So why don't you actually help him? He's bleeding and no doubt in pain, but by all means, fight someone. Todoroki snapped in Hitoshi's direction. Todoroki then tugged on Izuku's arm and led him away from Hitoshi. I mean, Izuku said it himself, did he not? Let it go. TCH. Recovery girl clicked her tongue against the roof of her mouth as she gently dabbed at Izuku's broken nose. Why do I have a feeling you're going to be a regular here? Izuku flinched a little as she continued to wipe the blood off and away from his bruised eye and broken nose. I'm sorry, he mumbled weakly. He had to mumble now because his lips were swollen. Oh, he couldn't help but say and wince when she dabbed a little too hard against his blackened eye. After Todoroki had dropped him off, he went back to ground beta, but not before saying something that Izuku hadn't expected. Hitoshi threw the match. He wanted to check on you so badly he couldn't just stand there and wait for the clock. Hitchin. The door opened suddenly and, oh, Jesus Christ. Aizawa breathed out at Izuku's face. Sent hurt. Izuku tried to wave it off, but his father wasn't having it. He was extremely gentle as he tilted Izuku's head up to get a full scale of all of his injuries. Can you heal it all? Aizawa asked Recovery Girl. Unfortunately, not all today. Too many tiny fractures and injuries to his face in total, but I should be able to heal his broken nose and eye socket first and foremost. I'll give him some gummies to help with the pain, scrapes, and scratches, and the rest I'll have to heal either tomorrow or the day after. Recovery Girl informed Aizawa as she then stood on her toes and gave Izuku a kiss to the forehead with her elastic-esque lips. Izuku immediately sighed in relief as the pressure behind his swollen eye started to dissipate and his nose reset, but felt even more tired than before. He felt like he could sleep for a decade if not longer. So, what happened exactly? Aizawa asked Izuku. Izuku felt himself sway sleepily. Battle simulation. Me and Todoroki versus Hitchin and Bakugo. Izuku started to explain as he laid down on the bed so his head was nestled on the pillow. Izuku then yawned. Bakugo went crazy. Demanded I say his name. But his name wasn't his name. I dunno. Izuku shook his head in confusion. Bakugo started to beat me, so I punched him through a wall. Izuku was losing his fight with sleep as his eyes started to close on their own accord. Wait, what? You punched him through a wall. He threatened to take Hitchin away and punish him. What do you mean by that? Izuku. Aizawa shook his son, but it was too late. Izuku was asleep. I'd leave him. I can guarantee he won't be waking up anytime soon. Recovery Girl told Aizawa as she typed on her computer. He was already drained when he came in. Aizawa looked at Izuku before he sighed in irritation. Okay, it's fine. I'll just see what happened whenever All Might gives me the footage. Thank goodness it records sound. But why do I feel like I'm going to have a talk with Hitoshi just as well? Izuku finally woke up from his quirk-induced coma. Izuku slowly sat up, the thin blanket sliding off of his shoulders and making him cold all over. Izuku groaned softly as he tiredly rubbed at his eyes. His face was sore all over, and when he ran his tongue over his lips he felt a smoothness from a busted bottom and top lip. Smacking his lips a couple of times he looked over at Recovery Girl who was typing away on her computer. How long was I out for? He inquired, his voice scratchy and sounding strange to his own ears. Roughly 4 hours. How are you feeling? Recovery Girl swiveled in her chair to face him. Fine. Still tired, but fine. That's good, dear. You slept through all of your remaining classes, but I think if you hurry you can catch the end of your last period. Recovery Girl then turned back to her computer. Izuku nodded before he swung his legs off of the bed he was resting on. Thank you, he told Recovery Girl before he slipped into his open untied shoes. Dad must have untied them for me, he thought. Once he stood up fully he felt a little lightheaded. You might still be a little woozy. Also your nose may bleed again, so avoid blowing your nose until I can finish healing you tomorrow. Recovery Girl told him and Izuku sleepily nodded. Understood, thank you again. Of course, oh, and before you go, take a small handful of gummies to help with any pain. She pointed towards a glass jar filled to the brim with gummies. Izuku nodded and took a small handful and shoved them in his pocket. Izuku then left shortly after that. As he walked down the hallway, Izuku realized his nose was clogged, forcing him to breathe out of his mouth. Bakugo really went hard on me. He couldn't help but give a mirthless chuckle as he walked through the silent hallways of UA all the way back to 1A. Getting to the 1A door, Izuku approached it and got ready to open it. Danger. Izuku jumped back just in the nick of time as the door swung open. First he saw a shoe before the owner lowered it to the ground. Bakugo. Izuku greeted him with an uneasy smile. Don't kick the door open. Do you have no shame? Came Ada's yell of disapproval. Bakugo growled before shoving Izuku with his shoulder. Out of my way, nerd. Oh sorry. Izuku took a step back as Bakugo started to stalk down the hallway. As Izuku watched Bakugo leave he couldn't stop himself. Bakugo. He said it just loud enough for Bakugo to hear him, and he instantly regretted it. But it was too late to back out now as Bakugo spun around. Bakugo immediately had steam leaving his nostrils, his eyes white and slanted downward in his anger. Izuku swallowed down his fear as he felt himself quake a little at Bakugo's ire. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry about your friend. He didn't even know where it came from as he said it. Izuku quietly picked at a piece of lint hanging on his shirt. I don't need your stupid fucking pity. Bakugo all but snarled in Izuku's direction. I'm not him. Izuku blurted out before Bakugo could turn to leave. I'm sorry, Bakugo, but I don't think I'm him. Whatever. You're right, you're not him. He's better than you. Ouch. Just stay out of my way, Deku. I'll crush you and avenge the friend I lost. Just you wait. Still keeping that name, huh? Bakugo then promptly turned away from Izuku and started to walk. Izuku watched him go before he turned towards the classroom where he saw everybody crowding the doorway, clearly listening in. Fated rivals, Ochako whispered with a bit of fire in her eyes. Izuku couldn't help it. He laughed and jogged up to the rest of his peers. So, what'd I miss while I was out? Do you think you're up for a balancing act? Izuku asked as he poked his head into Hitoshi's bedroom. Hitoshi blinked and looked at Izuku before grinning and leaning back in his chair. That sounds like someone bored, Suchin. Izuku snorted at Hitoshi's shit-eating grin. Is being grounded finally catching up? Look, I did all of my homework already and it's not even time for dinner. I need something to stimulate me in these trying times. Suchin, you have 2 black eyes and a barely healed nose. Are you sure you want to try a balancing act right now? If you fall, your face will just evaporate. Hitoshi tried to stifle his laugh, but he wound up snickering at the image in his mind. Izuku pouted a bit before he put his hands on his hips. You could have just said no. I'll just try. Dad still rings. Nah, I'm bored too. Hitoshi got up from his chair. Yes. Izuku pumped his fists happily and Hitoshi saw just how prepared Izuku was as he was in his beam shoes. Hitoshi grabbed his own beam shoes and quickly slipped them on over his feet. Together the two of them went to the backyard. Okay, how are we doing this? Hitoshi inquired as he laid a towel on the grass. A nice cold breeze brushed past the two of them and Izuku hummed while he stripped down to his shorts and tank top. Are you balancing on me or do you want me to balance on you? Well, Izuku got down and started to stretch his legs out. Hitoshi immediately followed suit and stretched his own legs, mirroring his brother. Last time I had you balance on me, so I think I should balance on you. In fairness. Fine. Are we doing the wheel? Nah, that'll really be pushing it with my injuries. Just a quick balancing act. Fine. Once they were both properly stretched out, Hitoshi got down on the towel and laid on his back. Remember, this is as much of a trust exercise as a physical one. Their gymnast teacher had told the two of them. Hitoshi, the teacher turned to him in question. Do you trust Izuku? Duh, he's my brother. Izuku. Now Izuku was under the teacher's gaze. Do you trust Hitoshi? I would die for Hitchin. The shocked look on their teacher's face was priceless, one that had sent Hitoshi into an absolute laughing fit. Izuku later admitted that he was nervous and just wanted to prove the point to the teacher that he, yes, trusts his brother. Okay, so how are we doing this officially? Where are you balancing? I think I'm going to try and go upside down. Izuku rolled his shoulder in his socket before he turned to Hitoshi. Oh, but the wheel is pushing it. Upside down is not pushing it. I've done it so many times I lost count and so have you. Hitoshi rolled his eyes but kept the smile on his face regardless. All right, whenever you're ready. Izuku walked over and together he and his brother attached their hands, interlocking their fingers to keep a steady grip. Izuku put his feet on the soles of Hitoshi's. Hitoshi's legs gave a little shake as he raised Izuku up a bit. Okay. Hitoshi breathed out once his legs steadied and he got used to Izuku's weight. God, I miss you when you were a twig. He grunted while he lifted his legs a little higher. Are you calling me fat? Izuku teased while he started to lift one of his feet off of Hitoshi's soles. You aren't exactly light. Maybe you just need to lift more. I can bench press 150, you know. Hitoshi's arms were now completely straight in the air. Hey, Izuku only gave an awkward laugh. Okay, I'm going to lift off now. Do it. Izuku breathed out and prepared himself. Okay. 3. He lightly bounced. 2. He bounced again. 1. At that declaration, he kicked himself off of Hitoshi's feet and used his momentum to hang upside down while his brother held his hands as still as he could. For a very fearful second, Izuku thought he might have used too much force behind his kick and that he was going to just fling himself over his brother, but, thankfully, he managed to steady himself and keep his legs straight then. They did it. Hitoshi's arms were quaking slightly from Izuku's weight and Izuku's own arms were shaking and the two just stared intensely while trying to keep focus on their balance. Izuku felt powerful like this. He felt like he could do anything. Hitoshi grinned while puffs of air left his mouth. God, you look like shit with those bruises. He finally managed to huff out. Izuku gave one lone laugh. I can only imagine. In a snap of a finger, Hitoshi's grin suddenly fell to one of concern and Izuku could only wonder why. Until 2 fat blood droplets suddenly fell directly on Hitoshi's face. Oh, Izuku, suddenly panicked, lost his balance. His legs fell forward and he couldn't correct himself in time. This caused his body to swing downwards and Hitoshi accidentally let go. Izuku was going to fall directly on top of Hitoshi. Hitoshi, clearly expecting this, tried to brace himself for the blow. On instinct, Izuku closed his eyes. That was when there was a familiar feeling of a scarf wrapping tightly around his wrist, and next thing Izuku knew he was yanked back and away from Hitoshi before he could land directly on his brother. Izuku fell on his back and looked up at his father. I already have one child that breaks his bones too often for my liking. Don't make it two. Their father sighed with slight relief. What were you thinking going upside down like that? That was only asking for trouble, Aizawa interrogated while he held his hand out for Izuku to take. Izuku was more than happy to take his father's hand. Go shove some toilet paper up your nose to stop the bleeding. Izuku nodded and quickly scampered away to do as instructed. Once he was inside, Aizawa turned towards Hitoshi. We need to talk. Oh boy. Hitoshi stood and dusted himself off. I didn't do it. He quickly defended himself. No, you're not in trouble. Well, no, we'll discuss that tomorrow in class. I need to ask a question regarding battle training today. Hitoshi sighed a deep and heavy sigh. Look, I didn't fight him, okay. I almost did, but I didn't. No, not that. Trust me, we will talk about that, but not now. Did Izuku tell you why he used one for all against Bakugo? Hitoshi shook his head. No, I never asked. I kind of forgot in all honesty. I mean, it's justified. Bakugo is a dick. Hitoshi, he told me, and he said Bakugo said something. But after reviewing the footage and listening, I realized Bakugo didn't say what Izuku said he did. Well, what did Zuchin think Bakugo said? Aizawa rubbed the back of his head almost like he was about to say something he really didn't want to. Hitoshi, Izuku informed me that you were taken away from him as punishment. Hitoshi paused. His whole body just felt numb as he absorbed his father's words. Hitoshi then brought his hands up to his own shirt collar and started to twist at it. Zuchin remembered. So, it's true then. Hitoshi swallowed hard as he continued to twist and wring his collar violently in his hands. Oh, no, I'll be good. I'll be good. Stop it. Izuku had wailed out in fear as one of the men had grabbed him by his upper arm and was yanking him down the hallway. Hitoshi could only watch as he was being pulled in the opposite direction away from Izuku. It was a vice versa situation. We were often kept away from each other. Sometimes we were. Hitoshi breathed out uneasily as he felt his shirt tear slightly from how tightly he was holding on to it. We were beaten for misbehavior if a situation ever called for it. He only saved the beatings for escape attempts though. Damn it, Hitoshi. I really wish he would have told me all those years ago. Aizawa cursed. We need every detail for your cases, you know. I was 5 and scared. Hitoshi couldn't help but lash out all the same as he let go of his shirt collar finally. I know. Aizawa gave his head a good shake. It's just, don't you trust me? What kind of question is that? Of course I trust you, you're my dad. Then why am I just learning about something as important as this now? Hitoshi looked away from his father, unable to look him in the eye. It's one of the things I found myself pushing in the back of my mind hoping to forget. I didn't exactly enjoy getting beaten, nor did I enjoy Hitoshi cut himself off. What? Hitoshi felt his lips purse. He didn't want to speak about it, nor did he want to remember. It just bubbled back up to the surface. He shook his head a slow and unsteady shake. Hitoshi, you can tell me. You know you can. Hitoshi shut his eyes before he put his hand to his mouth. Fuck, why'd I have to remember that now? He felt tears perking in the corners of his eyes. I was forced to watch. He wheezed out as he brought his hand away for a moment. As they beat Zuchin in front of me. He finally coughed out as he tried to push his tears back. If my memory is correct, it was our 5th escape attempt that led them to that. I don't know if I ever said this before, but Zuchin is lucky he doesn't have his memories of that hellscape. Hitoshi then leaned down and picked the towel off of the ground. Aizawa let out a deep sigh from inside of his ribcage. I'm sorry. I know that place was awful, but it's in the past now. No, not entirely. Hitoshi didn't even miss a beat as he smacked the towel against his leg a couple of times to get any loose dirt off of it. Not until the man who ran it is dead. How do you know he's not? It's been 8 years. Hitoshi didn't answer right away as he turned his back to his dad and started to walk towards the door. Trust me, you'd know. Who is he exactly? You've never mentioned him before and it seems like you had interactions with him. I never got his name. I just know that he's a man you never want to cross paths with. I will say, I'm surprised. About what? That he never took a special interest in you. He liked quirks a lot, and yours seemed like one he'd like, was all Hitoshi said before he finally walked inside, leaving his father on the lawn. Aizawa, Kashinori sighed as he walked inside of Aizawa's home. Bone breaker, Aizawa grunted in response as he shut the door behind Tashinori. Tashinori didn't exactly look impressed at Aizawa's new nickname for him. So, are you sure you want to do some training today? I mean, Izuku still has to be bruised up. Oh, he is. His nose likes to randomly bleed at times. But it's nothing too bad. Besides, he wanted this. He did. And you're allowing it. Well, he discovered something. Come on, let's not keep him waiting. I want to hear what he has to say. together. The two adults walked from the front door to the living room where Izuku and Hitoshi were sitting on the couch next to one another. Hitoshi looked over his shoulder at Toshinori before he looked away and crossed one leg over the other. He really doesn't like me. Toshinori almost wanted to cry with how cold this boy was. Toshinori, Izuku, the opposite of his brother, jumped up with excitement. He twisted in his seat and hoisted himself up on his knees and leaned his arms on the back of this couch. I'm glad you came. Toshinori grimaced at Izuku's face. Granted, it's better than before as the bruises on his face were in the process of healing and not angry shades of black and blue. Of course, my boy. So, what is it that you need to tell me? Well, I was thinking about it. If my memory serves right, I used one for all to punch Bakugo. Toshinori nodded, as did Aizawa. I watched it several times. You had to have. Aizawa commented as he looked down at Izuku. Despite the fact I didn't want you to use it. I hadn't meant to. I told you, it just happened. He made me remember I didn't even see Bakugo. Then who did you see? Izuku paused as he thought about it. Then, after a minute or two, he just shook his head. Nobody. I was fighting a voice. Aizawa let out a mild sigh of annoyance and shook his head. We'll talk about it later. So, you used one for all to punch Bakugo? Oh, yes. Izuku happily gave a little bounce as he became excited. So, I'm sure both of you noticed that my arm was in one piece and hadn't been broken from the attack. I think, even though I was fighting a voice in my head. You sound insane. Hitoshi turned his head to grin at his brother. Izuku turned and flicked Hitoshi's forehead. Hush, Hitoshi scrunched his nose up and rubbed where he was flicked. Izuku turned back towards the adults. Even though I thought I was fighting a voice, I still knew I was fighting a person. Toshinori nodded at Izuku's words. Do you think that maybe you subconsciously lowered your power input? Yes, but I'm not done. You see, I was so angry and honestly afraid. You see, I think I've been using the quirk wrong. Aizawa straightened up. How could you use a quirk wrong? Well, I was doing it how I've been seeing it done from watching you and Hitchin. I've been turning the quirk on and off. I think I've been treating it like an emitter, like brainwashing or erasure or even my own. Izuku turned his body and reached one of his hands out towards the remote sitting on the coffee table. In an instant, the remote shot up and slapped into his open palm. Object attraction quirk, which is an emitter quirk that I can turn on and off. Toshinori's eyes went wide as he listened to what Izuku was saying. I don't think I'm supposed to turn it on and off. I think that's one of the major reasons I break my bones. So, you think you're supposed to keep it on all the time? It's a quirk that never stops. Hitoshi inquired next as he leaned against the side of the armrest. Kind of. I'm thinking it needs to be constantly running through me. I shouldn't be turning it on and off because it's not an emitter. It's like Hisashi's quirk. Aizawa suddenly piped in. Yes, Hisashi is an emitter. He's the prime example of one, but his quirk is on all the time. I mean, the moment he was born he made the doctors, nurses, and his parents bleed from the ears. It's always on and he can only control it so he won't accidentally hurt anybody. My boy, you might be onto something here. This may be the reason why you have such a hard time controlling one for all. How'd you even come to this realization? During the fight with Bakugo, before I punched him, I had triggered one for all throughout my whole body in my anger and fear. And I think you're right. It was so much easier to control it through my whole body. Toshinori vanished in an instant. All Might now in his place. Young Tora, I request you punch me. Absolutely not. Izuku yelled with no hesitation towards All Might. I can't punch the symbol of peace. I want to see you punch him. Hitoshi grinned. But the grin didn't last as Aizawa suddenly grabbed his ear and gave it a pull. Oh, he hissed. Be nice. Regardless, I want to see it too. I think you're right, Izuku. However, we need to see this firsthand. Let's face it here, All Might is your best punching option, especially if you know punching a human will subconsciously lower your power level. Izuku made a face as he slunk down so only his eyes and the top of his head peeked out at the two adults. Okay, he squeaked out in his fear. Izuku's big green eyes gone wide with terror at the idea of punching his idol and mentor. It was decided to be outside in the backyard. It was safer that way and also the damage, if any, would be minimum. Izuku stood in front of All Might, shivering, but not from the chilly night air. Okay, so we know from last time we trained, 40% is too high. Even with this new revelation of yours, I want you to try and go lower. Way lower. Let's do 5%. Think you can do that? Izuku thought about it. I can try. It shouldn't be impossible. With shaking limbs, he raised his fists up. I can't believe I'm going to punch All Might. One for all, don't fail me. Izuku had thought as he felt his quirk surge through his veins, the immense power quaking just beneath his skin, lighting him up like a glow stick. Hitoshi breathed out something that Izuku couldn't quite hear, and his father. Well, if he was impressed or shocked, he didn't let it show. Izuku could spend hours watching the lights under his skin and around his person. However, the light show ended though the quirk was still surging through his whole person. It's not the first time you punched me, my boy, so don't be scared. All Might tried to calm Izuku down while he continued to grin that familiar smile. Wait, you punched him before, Itoshi yelled. It wasn't a punch, it was a palm strike. Izuku gasped suddenly at the blur in the corner of his eye. All Might, growing impatient, or seeing a moment to strike, charged directly at Izuku. Izuku, having sensed the attack, jumped back. A punch was thrown his way and Izuku just hardly managed to miss All Might's mighty fist coming his way by dodging to the left. He dodged to the right. Izuku watched All Might as he continued to dodge his mentor's onslaught of punches. He's not doing this maliciously. I don't think so. Is he trying to force me into a corner? To make me fight him? Izuku thought as he managed to duck under All Might's fist. He could feel the air above him move and ruffle his hair from how hard and fast All Might was swinging. One hit and Izuku might just wake up in the hospital. All Might is the very definition of a powerhouse. How would Dad go about trying to punch him? Oh, that's an easy answer actually. He'd use his size to his advantage. Izuku cocked his fists back. He could feel the familiar tingle of one for all as the power threatened to grow to an unbelievable force. Izuku focused on the power in his arm and imagined the egg in the microwave, the one threatening to explode any second. So, he forced the power to dial back to what he hoped was about 5%. Then he jabbed. He did not swing. He jabbed. There was a difference, especially since he aimed directly for All Might's throat. Well, good news. Izuku didn't break his hand or his arm for that matter. Bad news. All Might had disappeared in a puff of smoke the moment Izuku's fist made contact with his exposed throat. Worst news. Toshinori was writhing on the ground grabbing at his throat while he bled from the mouth and tried to breathe. Izuku couldn't help but scream. I'm so sorry. He rushed to Toshinori's aid. Don't you dare laugh, came Aizawa's voice as he immediately scolded Hitoshi, who looked ready to break down in a barely controlled laughing fit. He had his hands over his mouth in an attempt to hold back his laughter. Aizawa had a tight grip on his capture weapon, making it clear that if Hitoshi did laugh he'd be meeting the end of their father's scarf. Thankfully, after a few terrifying seconds passed by, Toshinori coughed. That wet cough gave way to him breathing. Toshinori sucked in a big deep breath. He breathed in, coughed up wet thick droplets of blood, and breathed out. I am so sorry, Izuku repeated just as loudly. Do you need water? I can get you water. No, Toshinori coughed and put a hand up. No, he wheezed out before finally being able to sit up. Like father, like son, I guess. His voice was scratchy and continued to wheeze while he rubbed at his sore, and probably bruised, throat. Seriously, what is with you guys and going for the throat? We're short and you're tall, was all Aizawa had to say. The throat is the easiest place for us as it's actually right at eye level and at an easy height for us to reach, unlike your face. You could see our punch coming for that and try to dodge. I see, you train your boys well. Thank you for noticing. I want them to be prepared for when they actually face off against villains. Still, please, tell me that was 5%, young Tora. Izuku nodded eagerly. It was. I had a better grip on my power levels with the quirk running through my veins. Toshinori fell back on his back suddenly. Great. Let's try and keep the bone breaking to a minimum from now on. Dad. Izuku turned towards Aizawa in question, his eyes wide and practically pleading. I still don't like the quirk and it's still highly dangerous to you. That being said, if you can show me that you can use it properly without breaking your bones every time you use it, I'll consider loosening restrictions on it. For now, I only want you to use it when I say it's okay during class. Understood? Yes, that's more than last time. Izuku pumped his fist happily. Aizawa snorted a half laugh before he reached over and lightly ruffled Izuku's curls. Still, be careful. I don't like seeing you with broken bones. The next morning it seemed reporters got wind of All Might working at UA. They were swarming the school like rats trying to get any scoop they could. Hitoshi and Izuku approached the gates to UA. The reporters swooped in like hungry vultures. Boy, is it true All Might is working at UA? Was the only question Izuku was able to make out. Instantly he clammed up at all of the cameras flashing in his direction. His blood turned to ice and his lips into cement, unable to move. No comment. Hitoshi had been the one to speak as he grabbed Izuku's shoulders and started to push his brother past the sea of reporters. Come on, give us a scoop, kid. Surely you have to know something. Another reporter, a male, had all but yelled at Hitoshi as he shoved a microphone in Hitoshi's face. No. Hitoshi leaned in and said to the microphone, what about you? Another microphone was shoved in Izuku's face and he instantly covered his beet red face. Suddenly Izuku's arm was grabbed and he yanked out of Hitoshi's grasp. Kid, just tell us something. One reporter had all but demanded as he grabbed both of Izuku's arms. Zachin Hitoshi tried to step in but another reporter grabbed him all the same. What can you tell us about All Might? Did he tell you to call that boy Zachin? A female reporter shoved a mic in Hitoshi's face. No, I call him Zachin because he's my fucking brother, get off of me. Oh, Izuku yelped. He yelped more out of reflex than out of actual pain. He just wasn't expecting to be grabbed as harshly as he was. But that yelp was more than enough. Suddenly a familiar scarf was wrapped tightly around the reporter's face and he was forced to let go of Izuku. I know you're not accosting my students. Aizawa's growl from behind Hitoshi. Let them go and leave before I call the police. But we deserve a scoop. We've been camping out here all night. A different reporter had whined indignantly. Aizawa's hair rose up and his eyes turned a deep shade of crimson. I said leave. Let's go, Zuchin. The moment he was freed, Hitoshi wasted no time snatching Izuku by the hand and using his ID to get them both into UA before they could be grabbed again. As soon as they crossed the threshold, there were yells of protest from disgruntled reporters. They were all shouting at once and neither Izuku nor Hitoshi could hear what was said. But what they did hear in just mere seconds could make even the bravest hero jump. An alarm blared so loudly that it reverberated throughout the whole campus. Izuku couldn't help but cry out in alarm and was slightly ashamed to admit he curled against Hitoshi a bit while covering his ears. Hitoshi covered his own ears to try and tone down the insistent alarm. Then it felt like there was a small earthquake beneath their feet. However, as soon as it happened, it was over just as quickly. When the alarm finally stopped, both boys turned to look behind them. The UA gate was now officially blocked off by a barrier, and so was every other possible entrance. Hitoshi only gave a huffing laugh. Some asshole tried to pass the gate. Give them enough for effort. But everybody knows that UA doesn't fuck around when it comes to intruders. Bakugo suddenly growled from behind the two of them. Bakugo then went out of his way to push himself between the two brothers. Oh, Izuku blinked at the sudden intrusion. Alright then. By the way, Bakugo suddenly stopped walking and turned to glare at them. You would have fucking lost yesterday if Barney over there hadn't have thrown the match. So, don't get cocky around me. I wasn't going to be. I'm fully aware of the situation, Izuku plainly said as he rubbed at his shoulder. Izuku then smiled and pointed directly at Bakugo. It's fine though. We'll have a rematch, and I'll win for real next time. Bakugo paused at Izuku's optimism before he suddenly scowled and huffed. Whatever. And just like that he left the two of them alone. Let's go and get some breakfast before it's too late. Hitoshi tugged on Izuku's hand. Yeah, I'm coming. After a quick breakfast, they walked to their classroom. Good morning, Achako greeted once they were inside. Morning, Izuku chirped right back and walked up to her desk while Hitoshi went for his own desk. So, Zuku, I've been meaning to ask. Do you have any tips for someone who maybe can't afford gymnastic classes? Can't afford? Well, Izuku leaned against the desk behind him. I would suggest maybe try your nearby park. They have plenty of things you can possibly balance on and help with your upper body strength. But, if you'd like, maybe after school today we can go to one of the school gyms and I can help you. I'm no expert, but I can at least help you be more limber. Achako immediately turned red all the way to the tips of her ears. That sounds great. Izuku smiled at her. Yeah, more students started to pile in and Izuku waved and made small talk with some of them. Mornin' Kaminari. He greeted his yellowed-haired friend. Kaminari ignored Izuku's greeting and simply sat down in his chair. Though, he must be tired and not up for talking. Hitchin can get that way some mornings, Izuku thought before he sat down at his own desk. The very moment the door rattled, everyone who was standing was immediately in their chairs. Mr. Aizawa opened the door and looked at everyone. Good, he grunted. You're getting better. Now, Aizawa stalked up to his podium. There's a couple things I want to say before we start today. I watched all of your combat trials. Bakugo perked up. You show a great deal of promise. However, you're letting your own personal bias and anger get in the way. You need to learn to let things go and move on. That being said, if your anger keeps up, I will be forced to put you into anger management classes. What you did to Tora is borderline unacceptable. Bakugo slumped in his seat. Heard, he grumbled in annoyance. Good, Tora H. Izuku felt Hitoshi shift in his seat. Yes, sir. You have the skills to do great things, but your devotion to your brother is blinding you. You would have won that battle trial and you know it. This is something you all need to know. It's okay to have friendships or even be in love with other heroes, but you cannot let that get in the way of your mission or goal. Aizawa lightly hissed as he scanned his eyes over every student in his class. You won't make it far if you do. Yes, sensei, everyone shouted, minus Hitoshi, who seemed to shift uncomfortably. Aizawa nodded and then straightened up. Okay, today you all will begin doing something greatly important for your future as heroes. He paused and let his words hang in the air, forcing everyone to jump to the edge of their seats. You'll be needing a class representative. There was a heavy sigh of relief in the air. Finally, something normal, a couple of kids had happily announced. What's so great about a class rep? Hitoshi sleepily grumbled as he rested his head on his desk. A class representative shows promising leading skills and great composure for sometimes stressful situations. Something hero agencies will be looking for in the future. Ida chimed in as he pointed at Hitoshi. I want to be class rep. Kaminari jumped up, making Izuku jump a little at Kaminari's energy spike. No, I should be. Mina yelled. You're all wrong. It should be me. You losers are beneath me. Bakugo snarled. I don't care how it's done. Aizawa stepped into his bright yellow sleeping bag. Just make sure you get it done before lunch. He then zipped the bag all the way to his neck and curled up behind his desk. There was a bunch of yelling from everyone in the class, people saying that they should be or would be the perfect class representative. Izuku stayed quiet. He really didn't care about being a leader. Quiet, quiet. Ada suddenly yelled amongst everyone, causing every person to quiet down. There is clearly only one true way to do this. We must put it to a vote. That's lame. We don't know each other well enough to do that. Everyone will just vote for themselves. Ajiro commented first. Yes, but it is the best way. Achako agreed with Ada. I don't care how it gets done. I just want it done. Aizawa poked his head up. Now stop wasting time. He growled, his eyes flashing a dangerous shade of red. It was agreed that they would put it to an anonymous vote. People would write down who they want as the class representative, and Ada would be the one to tally it down on the board by their names. Izuku didn't vote for himself. Nah, he didn't see himself as being class representative, so he gave his vote to Hitoshi. Hitoshi always took the reins and wasn't afraid of public speaking. Soon all the votes were tallied, and as expected, most people voted for themselves, but not everybody did. Aoyama I, Mina I, Tsuyu I, Ada 0, Achako 0, Ajiro I, Kaminari 0, Kirishima I, Kuda 0, Sadu I, Shoji I, Jiru I, Shiro I, Takoyami I, Todoroki 0, Hagakure I, Bakugo I, Tora 1-4, Tora Hii, Yayurazu I. Still, Izuku really didn't expect to get the most votes in the whole class. 4 people voted for him. 4. He had to check multiple times to make sure he was reading that right. Who the fuck voted for Deku? Bakugo snarled as he slammed his fist against his desk. What? You didn't think anybody would vote for you, right? Kaminari couldn't help but meanly laugh at Bakugo. Watch it. It's decided. Our class representative will be Tora I. Ada declared as he thrusted one of his arms at Izuku boldly. Still, Izuku could see it in his face. Ada looked rather disappointed that nobody voted for him. If nobody voted for him, then who did he vote for? Izuku thought as he slowly got up and walked up towards the podium. He felt all eyes on him, and instantly he felt himself start to squirm a little under their gaze. So, for your first action as class representative, who is going to be your vice representative? Ada demanded. Bakugo scoffed. Why ask? It's going to be that twin of his. He then stuck his tongue out and rolled his eyes. Izuku clammed up as Bakugo made a point. Izuku wanted nothing more than to have Hitoshi by his side. But it wasn't fair to Momo. Yet, if he chose Momo, he felt like it wasn't fair to Hitoshi either. Flip a coin. Izuku yelled out. I don't feel at liberty to make this decision. So, let Lady Luck decide. The good thing is that neither of them had to stand as Hitoshi just turned, sitting backwards in his chair now, towards Momo. You got a coin? He asked. I do. Momo took a yen coin out of her blazer. She put the coin on top of her closed fist. Call it tails, Hitoshi answered, and Momo flipped the coin up into the air. The whole class seemed to hold their breath as they watched the coin twirl in the air before it came crashing back down on her fist. Momo covered it with her hand and paused, waiting for a second or two. She removed her hand. Tails, she sighed heavily. Yes. Hitoshi jumped from his seat. Of course. Bakugo rolled his eyes in disgust. That did make Izuku feel a little better to have Hitoshi at his side. They smiled at each other. Okay, Tora I is class representative and Tora H is his deputy. These two are in charge, Aizawa commented as he slunk up for just a second before slinking back down behind his desk. You know, this won't be too bad, Tsuyu said with a bit of a smile. Yeah, I can get behind Tora I as class representative, and it helps that his brother is his deputy, you know. They already work so well together. Kirishima agreed with Tsuyu. Soon, a few scant agreements came from their classmates, and Izuku couldn't help but feel a bit prideful about this. He's never been voted on before, let alone win. I promise, I'll do my best at being class rep. So, you didn't even vote for yourself? Ada had inquired as he and Izuku sat down at the table together. Izuku forgot to pack a bento today, so it was Luncrush's lunch today, which was fine by him. No, I voted for Hitchin. I see. Well, you can rest assured that you had my vote. Really, but you risked not having any votes for yourself. I see a leader in you, Tora, and I'm not the only one apparently. Nope. Achako came sliding up, her lunch tray in her hands. She sat next to Izuku. I voted for you, as did I, which is funny, Hitoshi commented as he took Izuku's left. Because you voted for me. So then ... who's the fourth person? Most likely, Kaminari, I mean. Hitoshi blushed suddenly. Yeah, you're probably right. Where is Kami? Izuku looked around for their blonde friend, but he was nowhere to be seen. Hitoshi shrugged at that. No clue. He broke his chopsticks apart and started eating. Izuku did the same. For a moment there was no talking at their table as they all ate. Achako broke the silence. Luncrush's food is so good. This is seriously some of the best rice I've ever had. Yeah, it is pretty good. Izuku agreed. Itoshi then spoke as he stabbed at his rice, changing the subject suddenly. Hey, Ida, I've been thinking. You wanted class rep really badly. Why did you vote for Zuchin? Yeah, I mean you do look the part for class rep after all. Ochako chimed in with a smile. I honestly didn't feel that I was suited for the job. I thought about it, and wanting the position doesn't mean I'm suited for it. The Ida agency taught me that lesson. Agency? Ochako asked with wide eyes. Oh right, I almost forgot. He's from a long line of heroes. Izuku thought for a moment, feeling eyes on him. Izuku suddenly looked over his shoulder. Kaminari was standing there, lunch in hand. Izuku smiled and gestured for him to come and sit. Kaminari didn't. Instead, he actually used his index finger to gesture to Izuku to come to him. Izuku tilted his head and then pointed to Hitoshi with his thumb. Kaminari shook his head. I've been meaning to ask. Ada, is your family, like, super rich? Ochako had asked, and Izuku stood. I'll be right back. Please, carry on without me. He smiled at them. Hitoshi hummed and watched his brother leave, but when he saw Izuku walking over to Kaminari, he didn't bother to get up. What's up, Kami? Izuku smiled once he approached his friend. You can sit with us, you know. Am I a joke to you? Huh? Izuku blinked in surprise at Kaminari's accusing tone. No, why? I thought we were friends. We are. Did I do something to upset you? If I did, I'm sorry. It's just, why didn't you tell me you had 2 quirks? That's all I want to know, man. Why did you try and play it off like you didn't even know you had a quirk? Oh, right, everyone saw me punch Bakugo through a wall. Izuku looked Kaminari right in the eye when he spoke next. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you by not telling you. Truth be told, Kaminari, I didn't know I had these quirks until recently, and I just forgot to mention it to you. It's not that you're not my friend. I swear, with everything happening, it just slipped my mind. Kaminari gave a bit of a snort. It's just, it hurt, learning that you not only had telekinesis, or something similar, but also that you had super strength. You could have punched Akisho for us. Izuku laughed at that. No, I couldn't have. In fact, because of how late the super strength quirk manifested, I have very little control over it. Kaminari, it breaks my bones if I mishandle it. That's what happened at the entrance exam. Izuku lowered his voice to a whisper. I really am sorry if I made you feel like we weren't friends, or if you felt offended. Fine. I guess I can forgive you. If you get another quirk, I want to be the first to know. Izuku laughed. Fine, he joked. We good. He offered his fist for a fist bump. Yeah, Kaminari returned it in full. Good, now come and eat with us. Right as Izuku was turning to face the table again, an alarm blared through the entire lunchroom. We have a code 3 on campus. We need everybody to get to safe point. I repeat, code 3 on campus. Chairs clattered and lunches were abandoned as a bunch of students got up to run. Izuku flagged down the nearest student. What's a code 3? He asked the stranger. Somebody managed to get past the school security. We have to get to a safe area in the school. This has never happened before. The boy yelled before running down the hallway. Let's go. Izuku grabbed Kaminari's hand. He wanted to wait for Hitoshi, but he was immediately lost in the panicked crowd. Kaminari was forced to drop his lunch as the two of them ran. It was absolute mayhem. Students of all grades were crammed into one hallway, yelling, screaming, and just all out panicking in general. Izuku was glad he wasn't claustrophobic, but Hichin is. His mind told him in his own ensuing anxiety rising in his chest. Oh, Kaminari yelped when somebody stepped directly on his foot. This is insane, man. I know. Izuku screamed out to him. He kept his grip on Kaminari's hand tight, not wanting to risk losing him in the crowd. Where are the teachers? This is insane. An elbow was thrown out and caught Izuku in the back of the head, knocking him down to his knees. He nearly brought Kaminari down with him. Kaminari tried to help him to his feet, but suddenly he was shoved and brought to the ground. Oh, this time Izuku yelped when someone stepped on his hand. Stop, someone was stepping on his back, forcing him back to the ground. Oh God, I'm going to be trampled, he fearfully thought. Get the fuck off of him, came Bakugo's yell. And next thing Izuku knew, the person who had stepped on him was ripped off of him. Are you blind or just stupid? Bakugo then grabbed Izuku by his arm. Get the fuck up, nerd. Izuku was hoisted to his feet. Bakugo then lunged past Izuku and pushed the person who was currently trying to stop on top of Kaminari. Thanks, man. Kaminari breathed out as he was helped to his feet. Suddenly Ada flew above all of them and landed directly on the emergency exit sign above their heads. Everybody stop. You all need to calm down. Ada roared over the crowd. It's not a real threat. The reporters just managed to get on school grounds. Now we are UA students and we need to act like it. Please, everybody needs to make an orderly line out the door and stop shoving. Please, the reporters. Izuku thought with wide eyes as he watched Ada. He turned towards the nearest window, even though he couldn't see out of it fully with everybody in his way. He only had one thought. How'd they get past UAS defenses? Hitoshi was late getting back to class and Izuku was trying so hard not to let his panic show as he stood at the podium alone. He wasn't terribly late, only late by a few seconds, but he was late regardless. Was he hurt? Stepped on? Crushed? Izuku had thought in his panic, but it turned out he panicked for nothing. As moments later, Hitoshi walked through the door. His hair was out of its ponytail and absolutely all over the place. His school outfit was a little haphazard, and he was paler than normal. Izuku could see a thin layer of sweat coating Hitoshi's brow. Tora H, you're late. Aizawa hissed from his sleeping bag. Explain. I was vomiting. Hitoshi responded as he ran his fingers through his already frazzled hair. I'm claustrophobic and that Hushicho back there triggered it. I'm sorry. He apologized as he stood next to Izuku. Hitoshi then tried to wipe his brow with his arm. Hitoshi and Izuku both strolled up to the podium. Now, before you guys have any questions on what we're going to do as class representative and vice representative, I have an announcement to make. I'm stepping down as vice. He said plain as day. I'm sorry, after what happened back there, I realized I actually don't have what it takes to be vice representative. So, with Izuku's approval, I'd like to give my spot to someone more deserving. Ida. Hitoshi gestured towards Ida as he finished talking. Hitchin. Yes, I agree 100%. Ida, back there you managed to calm down a whole crowd of people. You absolutely deserve the role. Izuku smiled at Hitoshi as his brother stalked back to his seat where he immediately laid his head against the cool desk. Ida was next to Izuku in a second. I swear, as vice class representative I will do my best for each and every one of you. This is a waste of time. I don't care who is where. Just move on. Aizawa hissed at Izuku from his spot on the floor. Yes, we're done now. I swear. Izuku jumped. Good. Aizawa now suddenly stood and unzipped himself from his sleeping bag. Then the panel in the wall opened showing their cases for their costumes. Get everybody lined up. We're suiting up. We're all going on a little field trip. Everybody line up. Single file, please. In order with your number. Izuku smiled boldly as he gestured towards the bus doors. You heard the class representative. Single file. Ida, more sternly and loudly, barked while chopping at everyone that passed by him. No cutting nor bumping. God, do you ever shut up? Bakugo mumbled aggressively as he boarded the bus. Don't you fucking sit next to me, mindfuck. He snapped at Hitoshi who was right behind him. Oh, you fucking wish. Language. Ida slid in between Hitoshi and Bakugo and gave them both chops on the back of the head. As vice representative I will not put up with your foul mouths. Oh, geez, I'm sorry. Hitoshi grumbled while he boarded the bus. I'm not. Piss off, glasses. Bakugo hissed all the same. And if you touch me again I'll break all your fingers. He yelled before he disappeared on the bus. One by one everyone boarded the bus with Ida and Izuku getting on dead last. Both of them took their respective seats. Izuku, naturally, sat next to Hitoshi. However, he noticed that Todoroki was practically sitting in the aisle as Aoyama was laying down holding onto his stomach. Is everything okay? Izuku asked and sat up on his knees to get a better look at Aoyama. Is he alright? It's fine, Monami. Aoyama seemed to struggle to say as he squirmed a little in his seat. My tummy just hurts. That's right, he mentioned that while doing the pole vault. He can only use his quirk for so long before his stomach starts to hurt. He must be prone to tummy aches, poor guy. Izuku thought for a moment before looking at Todoroki. Todoroki, if you want, you can sit with me and Hitchin. This way you're not sitting on the edge of the seat and Aoyama could fully lay down. Izuku offered. There was a moment of silence as Todoroki seemed to think about it. Very well. He took up the offer and got up from his sliver of a seat. Izuku immediately squished himself into Hitoshi, who grunted as he was shoved into the window. Geez, Zachin, I can't make myself smaller, you know. Hitoshi gave an uneasy laugh. Todoroki sat stiffly next to Izuku. There was room for three, yes, but it was a tight fit. In fact, Izuku and Todoroki's legs were touching. Izuku looked at Todoroki and smiled warmly at him. Hey, Tora H, I have a question. Came the familiar voice of Tsuyu as the bus finally started to move. She was sitting directly behind them, so that made the conversation a lot easier. Yeah. Hitoshi tried to shift in his seat and wound up nearly clipping Izuku with his elbow as he twisted around to look at her. What is it, Tsuyu? Call me Tsu. I couldn't help but notice that you use a capture scarf, much like Mr. Aizawa. Yeah. Kaminari suddenly jumped a little from his seat as he snapped his fingers. I meant to ask you about that during lunch, but obviously that didn't happen. Regardless, Tsuyu grumbled as she shot an annoyed look towards Kaminari. That's a rare capture weapon, one I've only ever seen on Mr. Aizawa. Does he train you? Both Hitoshi and Izuku froze. Crap, she makes a good point. No, Hitoshi quickly, maybe a little too quickly, responded. Hitoshi then rubbed at his nose before answering again. He inspired me with his capture weapon. That's all. Well, it wasn't a complete lie. An inspiration, Mina had commented as she lightly rubbed at her chin. It was like a light bulb had gone off above her head suddenly as she beamed. She nearly threw herself over her seat in her excitement. Is that code for he saved you? Mr. Aizawa, did you save him? Quiet, came the sleepy drawl of their teacher. Aya, help me. Hitoshi shifted uncomfortably in his seat as he whispered desperately to Izuku. Izuku was careful when he turned in his seat. We saw him in action when we were kids. Hitchin really liked the idea of having his own capture weapon like that. Izuku covered for his brother. Yeah, I get it. Kirishima suddenly chimed in as he leaned up on his own seat from afar. You and Mr. Aizawa both have simple quirks that are powerful in their own rights, but you need assistance. That brainwashing quirk of yours is pretty awesome. Hitoshi's face dusted with pink for a second. Thanks. He lowered himself down just a little. Hey, Torai, that powerhouse quirk of yours, what does it entail exactly? Kirishima turned to Izuku. Oh, it's just your standard power-enhancing quirk. Kind of like yours. Only instead of hardening, I simply become stronger. But I need to be careful because otherwise I could break my bones. Oh man, that sounds awful. Still, once you get it fine-tuned, combined with your telekinesis, you could be a really great pro. This time, Izuku blushed. Immediately, he rubbed at the back of his head while giving a lopsided smile. From what I could see with your hardening, you have what it takes to be a pro as well. That's a really useful augmentation quirk. Yeah, but do you know who really has what it takes to go pro? It's Bakugo and Todoroki. They both have super powerful quirks with few limitations. That's true, but Bakugo is so angry all the time. I can't exactly see him being number one. Tsuyu teased while she stuck her tongue out playfully. Bakugo growled before slamming his fist down. You want to say that again? You know I'll just kick your ass. He stood abruptly from his seat ready to throw down. Tsuyu only grinned before she pointed at Bakugo. See, it's kind of funny. Kaminari leaned heavily against the back of his seat. We only just met you 3 days ago, so it's pretty telling that we all know your personality is flaming turds mixed with stinky day-old garbage. The more Kaminari spoke, the angrier Bakugo became. He gritted his teeth so hard that Izuku was afraid he was about to break a tooth. Huh. Hitoshi slapped his knee as he barked out a sudden laugh. Hai then curled in on himself as he started to wheeze. Izuku jumped a little, slamming into Todoroki by accident. Hitoshi's laughter was infectious. Next thing Izuku knew, he was starting to laugh just the same. Not as hard as his brother, but he was still laughing. I'll be the one laughing when I slam both of your heads into a wall. Bakugo all but roared in his rage. All right, quiet down. That was when Mr. Aizawa stood from his seat. We're approaching our designation. Instantly, any laughter and talking had quieted to a halt as the bus started to slow down to a stop. Remember, today we're learning about the trial of the rescue with Pro Hero 13. 13. She's so amazing. Ochako started to beam. I love her black hole quirk. If you're done. Aizawa softly hissed in Ochako's direction, and the girl immediately clammed up, stiff and rigid. Once he was sure she wasn't going to interrupt him, he continued on. The facility we're going to be in will be large and potentially dangerous, and I want you all to be careful and pay attention to your surroundings. Yes, sensei. Everyone agreed obediently. Good. The bus came to a halt in front of the large building, and just outside was Pro Hero 13. She immediately waved, and Izuku felt excitement flood through his person, and clearly it wasn't just him. Still, Izuku was class representative, so he kept his composure and promptly stood with Ida not too far behind him. All right, everyone. Please walk in a single file line to the doors. Izuku calmly spoke once he got to the front of the bus. He felt more like a flight attendant than a class representative, but whatever. No shoving. And please wait for the next person in front of you to move before you leave your seats. Izuku kept his tone calm as he instructed his classmates forward. It all went well except for Bakugo shoulder checking him on the way out. Izuku was the last person off the bus. Ida was waiting for him on the other side. You're doing good. Ida complimented. Thank you. Izuku commented right back before the two of them joined their classmates. Izuku noticed that Aizawa and 13 were having a private conversation with one another. Izuku was absolutely sure he heard All Might being mentioned while 13 held up 3 fingers to Aizawa. He ran out of time. What a shame, I really wanted to train with him today. Izuku thought rather sadly. Wow, it's really Pro Hero 13. Mina gushed excitedly. Hello, 13 greeted them. A lot of promising young heroes this year. More than last, right, Aizawa. Both Izuku and Hitoshi covered their mouths to keep from laughing. Oh, yeah, they've known of the infamous Class 1 that had pissed their dad off so badly that all 20 of them got expelled. But nobody else did. Aizawa didn't laugh. Instead, he shoved his hands in his pockets. Let's not get off track. 13. Please explain to the students what this building... Yes, of course. What you children are looking at is the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or USJ for short. That's exactly like Universal Studio Japan. Several students had cried out. That made 13 giggle lightly as she waved them off with a dismiss of her hand. Regardless of that, there's a serious discussion we need to have if you kids'll follow me. 13 gestured for them to follow and all 20 of them did excitedly. The moment they stepped into the USJ building, Izuku smelt many smells, ranging from the rancid smell of stagnant water to a smoldering fire. "Wow, this place is huge," Zero commented with a whistle. "Yes, it is." 13 shut her eyes and Izuku could tell that meant she was smiling. "Still, there's something you all must know before we continue with the trial. We need to discuss quirks." There were soft hums from all around from his classmates. "For those of you that don't know, my quirk, Black Hole, is a quirk that sucks up any organic matter. It's so strong and so powerful that not even light can escape it," she explained and even demonstrated by opening one of her finger caps and sucking up a couple of nearby rocks. The rocks were there and then gone within seconds. "Cool," several students had called out and even Izuku couldn't help but grin at the demonstration. She recapped her finger with ease before she turned back to the students. "Everything that gets sucked up into my black hole is immediately disintegrated into dust. Here's something you all need to know. As useful and valuable as my quirk is, it's also highly deadly." Any cheers were squashed down in an instant at such a serious tone. Everyone had quieted down and suddenly looked somber. "So, I wanted to tell you that while your quirks are undoubtedly powerful, I want you guys to learn restraint during this exercise. As a quirk, even a weak one, can be deadly." Izuku shut his eyes as he thought about what she had just said. Deadly. That word ricocheted around his head and it was clear that he wasn't the only one who was thinking about it. Hitoshi looked uncomfortable. It was in the middle of this somber moment that it happened. "What the?" Aizawa had suddenly jumped from where he was standing. At first Izuku mistook it for smoke coming from the fire area, but he realized rather quickly that it was thicker than smoke and it was purple in color. It was almost stifling and it made Izuku's head spin. "No!" Bakugo suddenly hissed. It was weird. He almost sounded distressed and when Izuku looked at him, he looked unchanged. Izuku looked towards Hitoshi. Hitoshi was looking in the center of the USJ. Izuku followed his brother's gaze and saw that's where the purple smoke was collecting from. Right in the center of the room. There was something familiar about this smoke and Izuku hated it. That was when a hand had emerged from the smoke. No portal in question. Several students had gasped in shock when a person pushed the smoke down to look at all of them. He had a hand, one that wasn't his, planted in the center of his face. The only eye that they could see looked downright crazed. Well, a raspy voice called out as the person stepped through the smoke portal with ease. "What have we here? Where is All Might? I was told he'd be joining your class today." Izuku felt a pull towards this person. It was the same feeling he had with Bakugo when he first met him. The feeling that you know someone but their name eludes you. Izuku took a step forward. Several others wanted to get a better look just as well. More and more people emerged from the smoke. In fact, the smoke started to make more portals around the USJ to allow as many people in as possible. "Is this part of the simulation?" Momo had inquired. "Stand back." Aizawa suddenly barked and Izuku watched as he put his goggles on. "No, those are villains." He jumped to the edge of the railing to get a better look down below. "Villains." Hichin Izuku had turned to look at his brother but he stopped short when he saw the horrified look etched on Hitoshi's face. Never has his brother ever looked so terrified. "Hichin." Hitoshi opened his mouth. All that came out was a sharp gasp. Then another gasp, and another, and another. "Hichin, it's okay." Hitoshi shut his eyes tightly and curled in on himself. More and more rapid-fire gasps left his mouth. At this point, Izuku wasn't scared of the villains, but he was more afraid for his brother. He suddenly cried out and Izuku felt his own blood turn to ice at his brother's sudden and shrill cry. "He found me." "Who?" Izuku demanded as he grabbed Hitoshi's wrist. "The man with axe hands." Izuku whipped around to look at the entourage of villains. Izuku then saw him, the man responsible for the Shinsu massacre. The man with axe hands. Only his hands weren't axes today. It seemed he was going for swords. Just as Hitoshi had described. At least 7 feet tall, except his hair, which Hitoshi had said was blonde, was cut down into a buzz cut. There, on his arm was the large lion tattoo. "Shit." Their father cursed out. "Everybody stay together." 13. Protect the students. You can't seriously be thinking of fighting them. Izuku barked at his father as he grabbed at his sleeve. "There are way too many." "You can't." Hitoshi almost sobbed as he grabbed fists full of his own hair. "You can't. Not against him. Your quirk won't be able to cancel out that many. Not only that." "Izuku." His father put his hand up to stop him from talking any farther. His hair rose and his eyes flashed red behind his yellow goggles. "You won't get anywhere without taking a few risks," was the last thing his father said before he jumped off of the railing and into the fray. Hitoshi covered his own mouth before the dreaded word left. "He'll be okay." Izuku tried to reassure his brother, but he was having issues reassuring himself of that fact. Yes, their dad was skilled. He worked hard for his skills, but he was one against many villains. The raspy voice from below them spoke, but Izuku couldn't hear what was being said. Izuku locked eyes with the first man who entered. The smoky portal is now gone, replaced with a purple smoky man standing next to the lanky baby blue-haired man with grayish skin. Come on. Kaminari grabbed Izuku's and Hitoshi's hands. Let's get out of here. We can't just. Hitoshi wasn't going that easily. I can't lose. His breath was hitching madly as more gasps left his mouth. Never has Izuku ever seen Hitoshi so uncomposed before. It scared him. He heard the grunts from below as his father bashed different villains left and right. How long until the man with axe hands would get to him? Will he meet the same fate as No? No, I won't think about that. Stop them, was all Izuku heard as he and the others tried to run for the door. That was when the man made of smoke appeared right in front of them, halting their escape. Kids gasped, some even screamed. The man almost seemed to float like smoke as he stood there, his bright yellow-colored eyes watching the students in front of them. Hitchin. Izuku knew this person, and it appeared it was vice versa. The moment they locked eyes, his narrowed knowingly. We're here for All Might, he declared. We, the League of Villains, demand his audience. Kids, get behind me. 13 barked as she raised one of her hands threateningly at the man of smoke. Izuku was more than ready to move back with Hitchin in tow. He cried when his leg was suddenly yanked from under him and he was forced to let go of both Hitoshi and Kaminari. I wouldn't do that, the man said plainly as his smoke was starting to reel Izuku in slowly. Kaken, save me. Izuku reached desperately for the boy in front of him as the smoke slowly sucked him in, unforgiving, and smothering him to the point that he almost felt like he couldn't breathe. The boy in front of him flickering between his brother and let him go. Bakugo screamed in rage. There was a flash of light followed by the sound of a firework going off, and next thing Izuku knew, he was freed. There was a flash of red as Kirishima had quickly got in front of Izuku. Hitoshi had freed himself from his scared stupor and ran towards Izuku. Zuchin. Hitoshi reached for him. Oh yes, I remember you. You're not getting in our way this time. There was a wave of purple smoke that slammed Hitoshi's form and sent him flying into a nearby wall. The back of Hitoshi's head struck the wall, knocking him out cold. Hitchin. Izuku tried to get up, but was stopped when darkness engulfed all of them in a powerful wind threatening to suck him up. The man of smoke was saying something, but Izuku wasn't listening. He was trying to get up, to run to his brother, but the smoke was sucking him up. Several students got the smart idea to duck down, grab the railings, even each other. Izuku watched in horror as Hidashi got sucked up in the purple smothering smoke with little to no resistance because he was unconscious. Izuku felt his body rise up into the air. Hai-chan, he cried out desperately as he and his twin were forcefully separated from one another. Hitoshi woke up at the worst possible time. He woke up to falling. He was falling and he didn't know why he was falling. A scream ripped through his throat once it had clicked that he was possibly falling to his death. Dark shadow got him. He was saved when something snatched him from around his middle and he was pulled a little more safely towards the ground. Once his feet were on the ground, he looked up at his savior. Takoyami, right? Hitoshi breathed out heavily and uneasily. Correct. Thanks for the save, I owe you. Hitoshi hissed when his hand rubbed against the sore spot on the back of his head. When he pulled his fingers back, he saw a thin layer of blood. Damn, that looks like it hurts. Do you need to sit down? Takoyami inquired as he took a step closer towards Hitoshi. No, I think I'll be fine. Oh, son of a bitch. Hitoshi had accidentally touched the spot again and he was cursing at his stupidity that time. I don't have time to sit. There was a ripping noise that made him stop and turn towards Takoyami, who was now ripping his cloak. He ripped one long thick strip clean off with the help of Dark Shadow. Once it was determined to be long enough to his satisfaction, Takoyami nodded and simply walked up to Hitoshi. He wrapped the cloth around Hitoshi's head like a bandana, making sure it was covering the sore and still bleeding wound on the back of his head. Hitoshi couldn't stop his hiss of pain. I couldn't help but hear. One of the villains seemed to have gotten you spooked. I take it you've met him? Takoyami asked as he worked on tying the cloth. Yeah, Hitoshi whispered. I have. I was hoping I'd never see him again. And now Mr. Aizawa is fighting him, and Hitoshi grabbed at his heart. The memory of his biological father's head rolling on the ground as his body falls limply to the floor was still fresh into his mind. Only now, instead of his biological father, it's his adoptive father who just falls to the floor, dead, never to move again. Tears perked into Hitoshi's eyes. I can't let him get hurt, he whispered nervously. Then it's probably best if we get moving, Takoyami instructed, and for the first time Hitoshi had stopped to look around at the area they were in. Where are we exactly? I know this is still the USJ, but he looked up at the seemingly endless amount of rain that was downpouring on them. They looked to be in a city. Best guess, the downpour zone, Takoyami commented as he looked around. Fine by me, he then said while Dark Shadow started to nuzzle him. I'm just glad they didn't send me to the fire zone. The light would have weakened Dark Shadow considerably. Hitoshi quickly looked around in every direction for an exit. He didn't see one. Our best option is to just go straight. There has to be an exit somewhere. Well, something wrapped around Takoyami's upper arm and drew him back harshly. What have we here? Hitoshi realized it was a hand just a little too late. The owner of said hand stretched his arm out 20 or so feet in order to grab Takoyami. Let him go. Hitoshi snarled as he grabbed onto his capture scarf and reeled it out, grabbing Takoyami's other arm, and for a very horrific moment Hitoshi realized he was playing a messed up game of tug-o-war with this stretchy-limbed villain. Hitoshi planted his feet firmly into the ground. I can't keep this up for long, his shoulder will pop out of his socket, Hitoshi thought as he tried to think of his next move. It was Takoyami that had the next move planned out. Dark Shadow, say no more. There was a cry from Dark Shadow as the quirk slammed directly into the villain's torso, forcing him to let go of Takoyami. Takoyami fell to the ground and Hitoshi reeled his capture weapon back. Are you alright? Hitoshi went running for Takoyami. Call it a sixth sense that made Hitoshi spin around, using his capture scarf once again, this time on another villain that was trying to sneak up on him from behind. The scarf wrapped around the villain's arms and forced them to her side. There was nothing special about this woman. She looked average, maybe a bit forgettable even. She had no visible quirk that Hitoshi could really see. Still, he wasn't about to let his guard down. This woman had an air about her that he didn't like. Hitoshi gnashed his teeth together impatiently as this woman smiled. It was this smile that made Hitoshi reach up with one hand to put his voice modifier on over his face. You're not All Might, you'll do all the same. The woman, who Hitoshi now realized was crazed, screamed out before she tugged viciously on the capture scarf. There was the sound of the cloth tearing before the woman freed herself. Her nails were now long, at least 5 or so inches in length and thickness, and, from the looks of it, sharp as all hell. She tore straight through steel alloy like it was butter, shortening Hitoshi's capture scarf considerably. Hitoshi immediately had to jump back once he realized she was rushing at him. What do you want with All Might? He demanded of her. We're going to make sure today is his last day alive. The woman stopped suddenly, her eyes losing all color as her jaw went slack. Well, then you didn't do your research, did you? If you had, you would have known better than to talk to me. Hitoshi smirked behind his voice modulator. Now do me a favor and point me towards the exit. He demanded all the same, and the woman paused before numbly pointing off to the left with one of her clawed hands. That quirk of yours is incredibly powerful, Takoyami commented. As is yours. Hitoshi started to jog towards where the woman pointed. As they passed her, Hitoshi spoke again. Go to the nearest building and lock yourself inside, he ordered, and she turned with no hesitation. Aren't you going to have to let her go? Yep. But the great news about that is that by the time I do, she'll be locked in a building. I can't believe she tore through my scarf. He looked at the mangled end of his scarf in disbelief. Isn't there a range to your quirk? I figured it was considering you threw the match against Todoroki to go and check up on your brother. A range? No, I can keep them under my control for as long as I see fit. The reason I let Todoroki go was because I couldn't concentrate on him and Zuchin at the same time, especially considering how badly Bakugo had beat Zuchin. Hitoshi explained as he tucked the damaged end of his scarf into his collar for the time being. I knew I was going to let him go regardless. You weren't always planning on throwing that match, were you? No, of course not. If Bakugo hadn't gone apeshit, I would have given it my all to defend that thing. Hitoshi scratched at his face nervously. I see. Takoyami shut his eyes for a moment before the two of them picked up their pace into a jog. You clearly love your brother. Yeah, I do. I hope he's okay. It was then where they both were forced to stop in the middle of an intersection before they could continue. 2 different types of villains stood circling each second of the intersection. This meant they circled the two of them by proxy. Shit, Hitoshi thought with a growl. The two of them had very visible quirks. The first being a man with dark blue reptile-like skin and a reptilian face. His eyes were almost completely black in color, and he would occasionally flick his tongue out to clean his snout. The second man with a visible quirk was a man that looked like a cactus. That wasn't a hyperbole. He looks like a cactus. His skin was a deep green with sharp yellow spines coming out of every bit of his skin there was. Even when he smiled, his poor mother was the only thought in Hitoshi's head at that moment. These villains looked blood-hungry as they stared the two children down like they were their next meal. And just where do you two think you're going? Cacti had snarled. When he moved, Hitoshi heard the sound of small objects falling from his person, meaning he lost his sharp little spines a lot. Get out of our way, Takoyami demanded as he stood next to Hitoshi. That was when the blue reptile man melted to the floor. He became limbless as he slithered along the floor so quickly that by the time Hitoshi dared to blink, he was already back in his human form directly in front of Hitoshi. His little blue tongue flicked in and out of his mouth rapidly, threatening to lick Hitoshi's face if he wasn't careful. If we decline, what will you junior heroes in training do then? Look at you, so scared. Trembling like a kitten, Hitoshi, remembering the night before, threw his arm back and punched the man directly in the throat. Get the fuck out of my way. Hitoshi roared in rage as the man started to choke. He grasped onto his throat in desperation while he fell back to the ground, a horrible gagging noise leaving his mouth as he desperately tried to breathe. I'm not playing this game with you fuckers right now. You brat, Cacti roared. He moved his arms in a wide arc and Hitoshi saw just what Cacti's quirk fully entailed as tens, if not hundreds, of sharp cactus spines were aimed and locked onto him. They never made it as Dark Shadow quickly shielded Hitoshi from the attack. That gave Hitoshi just enough time to get down to his knees and throw out his shortened scarf. The scarf only just barely managed to wrap around Cacti's legs, but that was fine. Hitoshi yanked the man's legs out from under him with a simple pull. Cacti went down, but Hitoshi wasn't done. Once the man was down, Hitoshi reeled the capture weapon back into his hands only to shoot it out again, wrapping around Cacti's upper arms. Hitoshi ran, pulling the villain into him, and then Hitoshi jumped. Hitoshi thrusted his knee up to meet the cactus man's nose. There was a sickening crack through the air as Hitoshi broke this villain's nose for sure. The man fell with a grunt, but he wasn't unconscious. The man was immediately silenced when Dark Shadow came flying out of nowhere and slammed into him directly. Cacti went flying back into the nearby building. Now he was unconscious without a doubt. Hitoshi turned to Takoyami. Nice job. That was when suddenly something long and lanky wrapped around Hitoshi's throat and tightened around it. You absolute menace. Snake Man seethed as he was now a lot smaller in stature, just small enough to go unnoticed before it was too late. Hitoshi gagged as the man constricted against his airway. His breathing was instantly stopped and he felt his face turn hot from this, no doubt flushing an ugly shade of red. Hitoshi tried to reach up and scratch at the scales of this snake, but his nails hardly did any damage. How does it feel? If it were possible, the man tightened himself around Hitoshi's neck. Suddenly, Takoyami's hand shot out, grasping the snake by its tail with one hand and its head with his other, and then he pulled. Within a second the snake was off. Hitoshi collapsed to his butt as he grabbed onto his neck. Forget that. That's gotta be the worst by far. Hitoshi could only think as he rubbed at his neck uneasily. Takoyami still had a Snake Man in his clutches. Snake Man was writhing, trying to get out, but not transforming back to normal size. Was he too scared to, knowing that they'd probably attack him while he was transforming? Then Takoyami simply smiled. Dark Shadow, care to do the honors? With pleasure. Takoyami then tossed Snake Man into the air with ease just in time for Dark Shadow to strike him, and away the little snake flew. Where did he go? They didn't know, but Hitoshi was sure he wasn't coming back. That was when Hitoshi walked up to Takoyami. Hitoshi then rested his arm on Takoyami's shoulder and smiled. We make a good team. I agree. Now, let's find the nearest exit and get out of here before more villains show up. Aizawa grunted as he punched a nameless villain to the ground. Several villains tried to rush at him, but with the help of his scarf he managed to propel himself upwards, and once at a safe enough distance he wrapped his scarf around two villains and smacked them into one another, knocking them out. He breathed out heavily once he landed nimbly on his feet. His hair lowered to his shoulders for just a second before he was back up and moving. These villains were endless. It felt like no matter how many he managed to knock down, two more took their places. He charged at a small female villain, kicking her legs out from under her before punching her right in the face. Down she went like a lead weight. Down again his hair went and he stopped for just a second. Someone was behind him, but not approaching. So, he turned. This one is mine. Aizawa didn't speak as he grabbed at his capture scarf and his hair rose. The man with axe hands. He thought to himself as the man was standing in front of him, his face split into a smug grin. His hands were not axes, but rather swords. Aizawa watched as this man's left hand morphed from a shiny sword to a sharp-looking broad axe. I've been waiting for this day. Aizawa almost felt a little giddy as he got down a little lower, ready to charge. 8 years ago, you murdered Yua and Dai Shinsu in cold blood, and I have been dreaming of this moment ever since I learned of your horrific deed. Shinsu, that name sure does sound familiar. The man lightly knocked the blunt side of his axe against his head like he was thinking. He then smiled a shit-eating grin. Are you talking about that purple-haired brat? Don't tell me he's still alive. Was that his scream I heard? I can't wait to see him again. Aizawa grounded his teeth in rage. Not while I'm still standing, you won't. Aizawa then charged. He activated his quirk and the man with axe hands became the man with normal hands, much to the man's confusion. This man may have been bulkier than Aizawa, but he wasn't stronger as Aizawa easily wrapped the man up into his capture weapon. With an angry war cry ripping from his throat, Aizawa flung the villain over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. Down the man with axe hands went as he hit his skull, and then he fell limply to the ground. Aizawa snorted and reeled his scarf back. We're not done. I'm going to come back to you, just you wait. Aizawa all but snarled in the direction towards the man with axe hands. When all of this is said and done, I'm going to break every bone in your fucking body. Aizawa swung his leg out, kicking an approaching villain directly in the stomach without looking. He had more villains to fight for the time being. Aizawa turned towards who he assumed to be the leader of this league of villains. I'm coming for you next. I'm so happy you're okay. Kaminari quickly attached himself to Izuku. Izuku, soaked to the bone, was a little apprehensive about hugging his human taser of a friend, but did so regardless. Izuku, Tsu, Kaminari, and Koda had all wound up in the same zone together. The flooding zone. Izuku was almost immediately snapped at by a villain, but thankfully Tsu had saved not only him, but Koda as well with that tongue of hers. Kaminari had landed directly on the boat, and now here they all were. Once he and Kaminari separated, Izuku felt his body shiver from his cold, sopping wet clothes. Izuku tried to not let his coldness show as he and everybody else crouched down in a small group in an attempt to hide from the villains surrounding the ship. And anybody hurt? Izuku asked in a whisper. They all shook their heads. Good, good. He nodded. So, what do we do now? Kaminari whispered softly as he pointed towards the villains waiting on him. Well, we have to be careful for the time being. They may know our quirks. Izuku was cut off by Tsu, who shook her head. No, actually, I don't think that's true at all. If they had, they wouldn't have put me here in the water if you think about it. That's right. I also have a huge advantage with water. Kaminari nodded along with Tsu. Okay, so then they don't know our quirks, which can be an advantage to us. Izuku whispered as he started to think about it in his head. Whoa man, it almost sounds like you want to fight them. Kaminari gave an uneasy giggle as he looked at Izuku with slightly worried eyes. Wouldn't it be best to just wait for the pros? Kami, no alarm went off. Not one. Someone has to be tampering with the security system. I'm willing to bet. I don't think the pros are coming. At least, not for a while. Yeah, and not only that, but I feel like they won't just sit there for too much longer. Tsu pointed down at the villains waiting down below in the water. Fighting is our only option. It was the drastic movement from Kuda that made Izuku look towards the quiet student. Kuda had his hands over his face and was shivering violently. He shook his head from side to side as well. He looked terrified. I'm with you on that, man. Kaminari was also trembling ever so slightly. I think we should all quickly explain our quirks and what they do. That way we can formulate a plan off of this ship the best we can. Izuku moved in closer towards the group. And, Kuda. Izuku leaned forward and put his hand on the other boys. I know you're scared, but you have my word. I'm not going to let anything happen to you, any of you, if I can help it. It's my job as class representative to protect you guys. His words seemed to put Kuda a little more at ease as his trembling relaxed just a tad, and he looked at Izuku with wet eyes. Then he lifted his hands up and he started to finger spell. I don't like violence, but if it'll help get us out of here, I can command animals with my voice. I can make them do things to help, like having birds scout ahead or even have them attack if the situation calls for it. That was when Izuku raised his own hands up so he could use both sign language and speak at the same time. I see. While a useful quirk, I don't think it can help us in this situation. As far as I'm aware, the USJ doesn't have any animals. I didn't know you knew sign language, Zuku. Kaminari suddenly commented in slight awe. Yeah, I have a deaf uncle. It's no big deal. Back to the task at hand. Tsu, what's your quirk like? Izuku asked as he continued to fingerspell for Kuda. Me? Well, there's not much to my quirk. I can basically do everything that a frog can. That includes jumping really high, sticking to walls, and I can extend my tongue really far and can even use it to grab onto people or objects. Tsu started and Izuku nodded, wishing for his notebook so he could write this all down. Oh, and I can camouflage myself as well as secrete a toxin. But it's mostly harmless. I can also spit my stomach out to clean it. Oh cool. Izuku nodded along. He'd have to ask her questions about it later when the situation wasn't so dire. Kami, he turned to his friend. Oh, well, you know most of my quirk. I'm basically a human taser and I can emit electricity. I can often even absorb electricity. Now, I can throw my quirk out up to a certain distance. But I have no control over it, meaning it can hurt anybody and everybody. Also, if I accidentally go over my wattage limit, I'm left in a very vulnerable state for up to an hour. Izuku nodded and sighed. I have two quirks. Object attraction, which is as it sounds. If I see an object I want, it'll automatically come to me. I can speed up, slow down, or even stop its projection towards me. Now, my second quirk is a little tricky. I'm sure you all saw during the battle trial that it's a strength quirk, which is true. However, if I'm not careful about my percentage level, I can very easily break my bones. It's rather finicky like that. That and my dad doesn't want me using it until I stop breaking my bones. Your dad? He's not here, Zuku. Besides, I'm sure he'll understand given the situation. Kaminari scoffed. Izuku twisted the hem of his shirt in his hands before he looked down at the villains below them. You're right. He'll have to understand. Besides, it's not like he can ground me, can he? Hitchin would get it. Izuku thought before he stood. All right, how are we dealing with this lot? Izuku asked his group. Izuku could feel it in the air as they discussed their plan. The villains were growing restless and agitated in the water. He could hear them shuffling around, but not coming up to the boat, because Tsu was right earlier. These villains don't know their quirks, so the villains had no clue just what they're dealing with. The plan was simple. Izuku was going to create a loud distraction. That'll give Tsu enough time to grab Kaminari with her tongue along with Izuku. Izuku was going to hold on to Kuta so as not to overwhelm Tsu too much, and from there they were just going to swim until they'd reach land. Be careful, Izuku. Kaminari reached up and gently pulled on Izuku's hand. If you die, Toshi will probably kill me and then himself. Dark, but not wrong. Izuku whispered back with a bit of a laugh. All right, remember the plan. Kuta, stay close, okay? Izuku signed to Kuta, and Kuta nervously nodded while giving him a thumbs up. All right. It was then did he jump up onto the railing of the boat. Izuku sucked in the deepest breath he could possibly muster before shouting out, "Eyes on me, fuckman." His yell was so loud that he could hear it echo and reverberate all around. Get out of my SCHOOOL. Izuku braced his wrist on top of the other as his quirk flared, and he saw sparks of green run throughout his body right before he flicked his fingers in the direction of the villains. Izuku grunted in pain as the 2 fingers he used broke. He didn't want to risk his attack being too weak, so he decided that he could sacrifice 2 fingers for this and used one for all at 100%. This action was more than strong enough to create a violent whirlpool that sucked all the villains in like a vacuum. Tsu wrapped Izuku up in her tongue, and Izuku swiftly grabbed Kuta, hoisting the quiet boy over his shoulder with ease. That was when Kaminari did something surprising. Lightning cracked around him. Izuku felt his hair rise from the static in the air. Kaminari only needed to charge up for a few seconds before he threw his arms out. Take this. He sent an electric wave down towards the water. It was like watching a blanket of electricity fall directly into the water. The screams the villains gave as they were being electrocuted in the water were horrific. Jesus Christ, Kami, Izuku whispered in his shock. Kami. Izuku slowly blinked as he looked at his friend. Kaminari had a rather dopey look on his face. He had his hands up, giving Izuku, Tsu, and Kuta a shaky thumbs up. Oh, he must have gone over his limit. Izuku took note of the small trail of blood running from Kaminari's nose. So, this is what he meant when he said he was vulnerable. Tsu responded. Still, color me impressed. You guys are pretty amazing. Izuku felt his face heat up from the praise. Thanks. When they hit the water, Tsu had to carry Kaminari on her back while she swam underwater. Kaminari still did that little laugh while he flashed them all a thumbs up. Izuku and Kota both swam close together, and it didn't take too much longer for them all to hit land. Man, that was risky. I'm glad it paid off. Izuku mumbled nervously as he started to stand. He quietly nursed his broken fingers. You're telling me, Kuta, can you hold on to Kaminari so he doesn't accidentally drown himself? Tsu asked, and Kuta obliged, holding Kaminari up bridal style so the risk of accidental drowning was decreased. Kaminari continued to flash his thumbs up towards Kuta. Now what do we do? Tsu had started to inquire, but she stopped once she saw Izuku's hand. Are you okay? That looks like it hurts. I'm fine. Izuku quickly covered his hand with his sleeve. As for your question, our best course of action is to try and find a way out to get help from the adults. Izuku told her, and she nodded. I agree. Is that Mr. Aizawa? Izuku immediately turned to look where she was looking, and he watched as his father fought for a few seconds. We should help him. He breathed out as his heart fluttered nervously in his chest. A fear overtook Izuku in a second as he watched his dad. His dad was fast and limber, expertly dodging left and right, but he had to be running out of steam. He needs help. He needs me. Hold up, Torai, we can't just run in. Let's swim up and wait for an opening. Tsu put a hand on his chest, and for good reason. Izuku never realized he was about to take off until she had touched him. Izuku looked at her nervously before nodding. You're right, come on. Izuku slunk back into the water and started to quietly swim up to the plaza, but also in a place where they were able to keep hidden. Kuta kept his hold on Kaminari, and even put a hand over his mouth to keep his little hez quiet. Dad. Izuku watched his father fight, expertly dodging left and right while knocking villain after villain down. Still, Izuku knew his father. He was running out of steam. Each time he stopped to take a breather, Aizawa was panting heavily and sweat was beating down his face, soaking his hair. Then it was right back into the fray when another villain would inevitably attack. The man who caused this, the man with hands all over his body, started to rush at Aizawa. So, you must be the final boss, Aizawa hissed before he shot his capture weapon out at the man. Aizawa charged, managing to slam his elbow into the villain's torso. Izuku, Tsu, and Kuta all gasped happily at this. Dad has this. He always has things under control. Izuku's thoughts were cut off once he saw that the villain had his dad's elbow in his grasp. It wasn't easy to spot when you were constantly jumping around. But I finally found your tail. Your hair. Aizawa let out a grunt of pain, and Izuku could only watch in horror as his father's elbow started to turn a sickening shade of gray right before the clothes disintegrated. You're having to blink a lot more often. Izuku's horror only grew as the skin around his father's elbow turned to ash along with the blood as it was showing his muscle. No, Izuku bit his lip. Stop it. You really shouldn't push yourself too hard now, Eraser. You might just fall apart. The skin caked away, falling down like tiles from a roof. A loud and sharp gasp left Izuku's mouth. Aizawa managed to swing his other arm, punching the man away from him. The villain gasped out in shock as he fell to the ground. Aizawa took several steps back away from the villain only to immediately almost be attacked by another one. Even with one of his arms down for the count, Aizawa still managed to defend himself by kicking said villain away from him and dodging away from another one. It still wasn't enough though, as soon he was surrounded. That stupid quirk of yours isn't made for long drawn-out battles, is it, Eraserhead? The blue-haired villain mocked as he got up. Izuku felt that familiar buzzing in his head as he heard this man speak. He knew him. Izuku knew he knew him. You work more with stealthy situations, one-on-one battles, player versus player. Not for a big battle royale like this. You know this, and yet still you didn't hesitate to jump into the middle of the fray. Why? For your students, to put their minds at ease. One villain, one with sharp metal claws, tried to swing at Aizawa, but Aizawa managed to wrap them up before they could get that far and he sent them flying. The group that had him surrounded all tried to attack, but Aizawa managed to knock each and every one of them down. His breathing was heavier, more labored, but still, Aizawa turned towards the main villain and tugged on his scarf, letting his hair rise up once more. You're still standing. You are so cool. But I guess I should tell you. The bird-like behemoth appeared out of nowhere beside Aizawa. Aizawa gasped out and turned his head. But he turned too late. I'm not the final boss. Izuku's eyes went wide as whimpers left his mouth. He could only watch in absolute horror as this creature beat his father into the ground. Blood went flying everywhere as his father cried out in pain with each attack. No. Dad. Izuku whimpered. His heart felt like it was ready to implode. The idea of losing his father horrified him. He wasn't ready to lose his dad. Not now, not like this. Stop. Izuku was moving before his mind was. Don't hurt him. The creature bashed his father's head into the ground. More blood spilled. I said stop. Before he knew it, he was standing in front of the creature. The villain almost seemed to laugh at this, but his laughter was short-lived because the creature, whatever it was, it stopped. The brutal fight was over in seconds. His father laid there whimpering softly while this thing had his in its grip. Izuku swallowed hard as he clenched his fists by his side. The creature trilled in confusion as it tilted its head at Izuku quizzically. Namu, you listen to me. But I guess I have some questions now. The scraggly villain suddenly hissed before he rounded on Izuku. Who are you to control my Namu? A player too. He then started to scratch at his neck. Izuku felt himself start to shake a little while he swallowed hard. You look familiar to boot. Did I really control that thing? Izuku. It was Tsu's cry that made him turn his head just in time to see something glittering coming at him. Izuku only just barely managed to dodge, getting his head chopped clean off of his head, but not fast enough to save his cheek as the edge of an axe dug into the soft part of his cheek. He stumbled back and grasped onto his bleeding cheek. He then looked up at the man with axe hands. Izuku, Namu, catch him. Izuku didn't have time to react. First he held his bleeding cheek, and then next thing he knew he was being put into a hold, pressed against this Namu's chest so he couldn't move. Let me go. Izuku swung his fist back behind his head in an attempt to hit Namu against the side of his head. Detroit smash. Izuku roared out as one for all coursed through his veins and body. Nothing happened. The creature wasn't even phased. Smash. Don't tell me you're acquainted with All Might, Izuku. Besides, it's not like that little attack will do anything against my Namu. It's the anti-symbol of peace, made specifically to negate any attack he may do to it. A powerful creation indeed. Don't talk to me like we know each other. Let me go. Izuku roared at Namu. It worked once, why not try it again? The creature's grip went slack for only a second before it tightened. Fine. Izuku wheezed out uneasily as he looked towards his friends. They were still in the water. Tsu looked like she wanted to jump in, but he didn't blame her for not. This creature, this villain, they were no joke. You absolute idiot. You could have killed him. I thought you wanted them dead. Shigaraki. Shigaraki. Talmechin. What? Izu-sama. Izuku knew that name. The buzzing in his skull intensified tenfold and almost made Izuku feel sick. Things changed. The prodigal son has returned to us.